Good morning, I'm Jim McMahon, the Labour and Co-operative MP for Oldham West and Royton. I'm the Shadow Transport Secretary, but importantly, the Chair of the Co-operative Party. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Co-operative Party's Local Government Conference 2021. I'd like to start by thanking you, our councillors, our members and our supporters, because the work and effort that you bring is the beating heart and soul of the Co-operative Party and our movement. Care and concern for our communities is enshrined in our values, and whilst the COVID-19 pandemic has been a dark period, the way our communities have come together to help and support one another has been a shining light and has made me so proud that it's reflected our values. Our councils, councillors, cooperators working tirelessly to support the most vulnerable and keep vital services moving in our villages, in our towns and in our cities. But we're still living in challenging times and circumstances. As we continue to grapple with the health, social and societal challenges under this government, the economic impact will also pose stark questions. And the solutions to those questions must stem from cooperation and our grassroots movement, where communities come together, where they self-organise, and where we have a government in place that supports them, giving them the tools to make change happen on the ground. It's Labour and cooperative councillors that are continuing to lead the way in presenting innovation, ideas and solutions in these times of real hardship and challenge. And as we face the future to rebuild our communities, we need to make sure that there are as many cooperative representatives elected in 2022 as possible to ensure that our values and our outcomes are at the forefront of our recovery. In May 2022, we have important council elections across England, Scotland and Wales, and really key battlegrounds such as Birmingham, Bury, St Helens, Rochdale, Oldham, Manchester and Newcastle upon Tyne. And I look very much forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with you in campaigning to elect as many councillors as possible. I know that we can do it and I know that we'll be outstanding. So if you're standing for the Co-operative Party for the first time, good luck and thank you for putting cooperation into your manifesto. And if you're standing again, thank you for your continued commitment to our movement. We're keen to grow our cooperative family as much as possible. So please do speak to colleagues in your Labour group and tell them about our ideas, our campaigns, and suggest that they join our movement too. Our exciting programme following our conference theme of Community Power in Action includes several exciting sessions. And so today you'll hear from the Mayor of Liverpool, Joanne Anderson, about the plans to build community power right across Liverpool. You'll hear about our important work to unlock the high streets in that important campaign, because protecting our high streets is important right across the country. And we'll also hear from Usdaw, our friends, about their Respect Shop Workers campaign that we've been so integral to. And we want to make sure that we use Parliament to bring forward legislation that gives real protection to our shop workers, just as Daniel Johnson has done through the Scottish Parliament, laying that important foundation. And our local campaigns have been fantastic, and it'll be good to hear more about our campaign for food justice and our campaigns to end modern day slavery. And you'll hear right across the country of really good examples where councillors are making a difference. My colleague Steve Reid will give an overview of the local government landscape. He'll set the context for next year's important council elections. And I know many council groups have used our 12 ideas for local government in their manifestos to develop ideas for their local community. And you'll get the chance to hear the latest update on those 12 ideas ready for next year's election. And I hope that they'll give you the inspiration that I got when you hear the difference that they can make. And then we'll think about developing community power from Professor Donna Hall of the New Local Government Network think tank. And lastly, you'll hear from senior cooperators, councillors in North Ayrshire, in Hackney, my own council in Oldham, about what they've done to promote the cooperative ideal in everything they do to build power and resources from the ground up. Listen, I hope you find today exciting. I hope you'll learn from the exchanges that are taking place, and I very much look forward to meeting you in person at a future conference. We are the best when we come together and the best when we cooperate, and it's conferences like this that are so important for that.
Thanks very much, Jim. What a fantastic way to start our day. want to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Richard McCready. I'm the political officer at the Co-operative Party. I'm really pleased to add my welcome to today's Co-operative Party local government conference. As a councillor here, myself here in the city of Dundee, I know that there will be many calls in your time. So thank you very much for making the time to come along and join us today. It's really important. I wanted to kick off with a few tips on how we can make the event as interactive for everyone and allow people to take part. To aid greater accessibility, all sessions will be live captioned with subtitles made available if needed. Make sure you click on the CC box at the bottom of the screen, and the captions will appear. We'll also put some details about that in the chat. At various points today, there will be the opportunity to post a comment or a question. Type your question or comment into the chat feature, which, depending on how you're watching the event, is either at the side of the video or below the video. Also, please tweet about today's event using the hashtag CoopLocal21 and tag us at Coop Party Local or at Coop Party. Finally, just before we start, I want to emphasise that the Co-operative Party believes that our cooperative values should be reflected in our actions as well as our policies. We want all our members and all our events and all our event participants to feel safe, welcome and respected in our party. Please ensure you abide by this when making your contributions today. And I just want to reiterate something that Jim McMahon said. If you are thinking about standing for election to council next year, whether you're a long-standing councillor or somebody thinking about it for the first time, please do consider standing as a Labour and cooperative candidate. And throughout the day, there'll be details about how you can join our candidate development programme. And visit our local government hub to find out more about that. So moving on to a very exciting first keynote speaker, we are delighted to have Mayor Joanne Anderson, the Mayor of Liverpool, to address us today. At 19, Mayor Joanne was voted as a shop steward in a male-dominated workplace, active in the Transport and General Workers Union. Mayor Joanne held several positions within the Black and minority ethnic structures, women's and young members forums, as well as a member of the TUC Race Relations Committee. Mayor Joanne was elected as Liverpool's first female mayor in May this year, after serving as a councillor for the Princes Park ward for 2 years. She's proud to be the first Black woman to be directly elected as a mayor in the UK. She strongly believes that Liverpool's city plan will help build a better, fairer city for all. She's committed in particular to empowering communities and promoting equalities. She's passionate about delivering the All Voices pledge and ensuring that everyone is given a voice for their future. It's that commitment to empowering communities that we are very interested in hearing about today. And I want to thank Joanne for joining us today, because I'm sure on behalf of everyone on the call, we recognise it's been a very tough week for the city of Liverpool, and it's great that the mayor has found time to join us. And I think I'm sure on behalf of everybody on the behalf of the Co-operative Party, we can express our solidarity with the people of Liverpool and the people who've had to deal with some of the difficulties that they've had in the past week. So it's a great pleasure to ask Mayor Joanne Anderson to address us today. Over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everyone, and thank you. Yes, it's been a bit of a week, to say the least. I wanted to talk about sort of my values growing up, and I had to talk to my mother to ask about how the co-op impacted our lives. And so my mum was one of 10 growing up. And whilst my mum has never got my name right, even from when she was 20 years of age, she's now 70, but she remembers the co-op number she had to give in the local supermarket when she was growing up. And so it was the first supermarket in her area. They were given a number and you had to give it in every time because you got a bonus at the end of the year. And obviously this impacted a family of 10 in a really positive way. So very good memories from my mum and the family about the co-op. She talked about being able to get cheap baby milk and also in terms of funeral care, and I think she remembers a slogan from the time that the co-op looks after you from cradle to grave. So very much etched in her mind and her upbringing. And when I was growing up, my mum ran the local Citizens Advice Bureau, and my auntie had mobile shops. So two very key women in our local community. If you had a problem, you went to my mum. If you had a need, you didn't have enough milk, you needed a loaf of bread, my auntie would give you those things on tick, give you it on credit. So both of these women had such an impact in the community. But one of the things my mum was dealing with was obviously people being in lots of debt, and also my auntie going to loan sharks every now and again to stock up her mobile shop. And so my mum set up the first credit union in Liverpool. And in doing that and in running the bureau, she worked with volunteers, consistently motivated people to join them and help with the credit union, but also the Citizens Advice Bureau, teaching them vital employability skills, many of which went on to well-paid jobs. And almost every kid who didn't go to school or left school with no qualifications was given a start in my mum's bureau in order to help them on their way in terms of their employability journey. So unbeknown to me, I'm witnessing, and my beliefs are being shaped and my values are being shaped by all these experiences, values that I share with the cooperative movement. Obviously, the values of self-help and democracy, equality, equity and solidarity. Co-op members believe in ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility and caring for others. And my whole upbringing has been shaped by those values. In later years, I became an equality and diversity consultant, and I set up the first social business in Liverpool. And again, cooperatives and how mutual societies all shaped my kind of early work experiences. So the Co-op Party in local government stands for putting people into politics, something I strongly believe in. We've had 3 MPs, cooperative MPs in Liverpool. We have lots of Co-op Party councillors. And Liverpool has a long track record of supporting cooperative values. We've invested in our credit union network. We've invested 1 million in order to help people stay away from loan sharks and doorstop lenders, and also build support in developing that network. The council is proud to be an early adopter of the party's Charter Against Modern Slavery. I used to work in the Crown Prosecution Service, and I had kind of first hand experience of some of the details that happens in modern slavery cases and some of the impact that it's had on people's lives. And I'm really proud that Liverpool was an early adopter of that policy. We'll be debating next month the carpetbagging attempt to demutualise Liverpool Victoria, one of the oldest and proudest mutually owned businesses founded in Liverpool, to the cost of burials, and I'm sure our council will support any action to try and make that to stop that happening. And we've got a long record of campaigning and activism that has made the Co-op Party a strong force in Liverpool. And the work that you do with communities, we've supported the party's Unlock the High Street campaign. In recent years, we've invested nearly £2 billion in our city, but very predominantly in the city centre with big shopping districts like Liverpool 1. And they've been welcome and important, obviously, but they haven't done enough to share opportunities and growth across the city. I'm from an area that's on the outskirts of Liverpool, and I live now in the city centre. What I see is amazing. Everything is on my doorstep. I see what visitors see. But in some of our areas across the city, there's very little opportunity, particularly for young people. And so we have many district centres and high streets that are really struggling. And although the challenges are complex, opaque ownership, high rents and profit-seeking absentee landlords, not to mention the broken business rate system, we want to do everything we can to breathe new life into our high streets and empowering communities to give them the tools to take control. In our manifesto, we promise communities more power and control over our decision making. And previously, some work had been done in the council around new generation neighbourhoods. We promised in the manifesto 20-minute neighbourhoods, ensuring that, what I see living in the city centre where, you know, everything is accessible to me, from universities to doctor's surgeries to green spaces to retail. Everything is accessible in the city centre. We want 20-minute neighbourhoods where all the local amenities are provided within 20-minute walking distance. Next generation neighbourhoods fits perfectly with this, where we recognise as a council we need to work better to stop siloed activity in tackling community needs. So together, in our plan for the next 18 months is to look at how we can reinvent our communities and neighbourhoods in partnership with our communities. Personally, what I'd like to see at a community level, I would like to see cooperatives looking at things like cycle repair shops, repurpose shops, active travel hubs, food cooperatives, credit unions, community cafes, community libraries. I want to see a worker-owned postal shop. For me, our high streets of the future look like that. And the pandemic has showed us that it is possible. People come together and supported one another and showed solidarity and concern for the community, and also worked with the community to meet the community's needs. And they might not be aware of it, but those collaborations of mutual aid groups, neighbourhood WhatsApp groups, emergency food deliveries, and shielding vulnerable people, they were cooperators, and they've shown the world what is possible when people come together and act in a common interest for the good of their community. I want Liverpool to tap into this power of community politics. We've called on the government to reform the way businesses on our high streets are taxed so that they aren't penalised by onerous business rates, while big global companies get away with not paying their fair share. And we need to put our money where our mouth is as local politicians, not just providing the money for the city centre, but allowing the people affected in communities, not only the politicians and the ministers, but allowing communities to decide how to spend the investment into their communities. If levelling up is to mean anything at all, it must mean this giving power over to communities to make decisions for themselves. This is truly what putting people into politics is about. And our work hasn't stopped there. We had a triple manifesto we had a triple lock in our manifesto, which meant that every decision we make as a council is viewed through the lens of equality and diversity, social value, and environmental impact. And this stands us in good stead to do some of the things that we want to do about handing power over to communities. I was delighted when Nick Croft, a local councillor and co-op member, when I asked him about the co-op movement, because I had ideas about developing hyper-localised models of care. And I was delighted when Nick told me about the Co-op Innovation Network. It was fantastic to learn that, you know, people have done this, have worked together, have tried to learn what can be creation of better models for care and other areas. And so I rejoined recently for our council, and I'm really looking forward to working with other councils and cooperative members. If we're really to transform people's lives, then communities and councils have to work together in partnership. And whilst I'm a big supporter of devolution, devolution has to come from not only from Whitehall down to devolved authorities, but down to our communities, not just our town hall. I want to make sure that the responsibility for decision making in communities have their rightful say. And so the longer term for us on the next generation neighbourhoods the new generation neighbourhoods, and not just how we co-design services that are needed, but the longer term aim for us would to be devolving budgetary responsibility to communities. And the pandemic has showed us that this can be done, and what people can do when they are given the chance and take responsibility. And despite the challenges ahead of us, the communities come up with fantastic ideas. And as I say, the Innovation Network is a brilliant opportunity for us to learn about what other councils are doing in this area and to share some of Liverpool's success stories. So cooperators have always worked together and shared their learning, and we know what can happen as a result. And I'm proud to be involved in that network again and be involved with the cooperative movement. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joanne. I think that was fantastic. A fantastic way to start with our first keynote address. It's good that we cover the whole range of issues, from your mum's divvy number to the really important issue that the Co-op Party, and hopefully people will be looking out for our campaign on LV Liverpool Victoria, and the shameful attempts to demutualise it. I think it's really important that we do support that, and I'm sure Liverpool City Council will support that, but wish you well in that. And I think we heard stuff there about which links into our next session around. So I want to thank Joanne very much for giving us the time today. Really appreciate that fantastic contribution to start our day. And we heard there about the high streets and the importance of high streets, and the importance of high streets in the city of Liverpool. And we'll hear maybe about high streets in the next session around in different locations. And I've got a campaign that is effective in cities and is effective in small towns and even villages. So I'll introduce you to the chair of the next session, who is Councillor Sharon Taylor, who is the leader of Stevenage Borough Council. And we just heard there about the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network, and Sharon is the chair of that and a long-standing champion of that network. And I think it's really important that anyone who's on the call, if you are elected next year, or you're currently elected, you should think about getting your council to join the Co-operative Councils Innovation Network. It's fantastic to have Sharon here, and I'll hand over to her. Thanks very much for joining us, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Richard. And what a fantastic start to our conference with both Jim and Joanne. And Joanne, you're very welcome back in the Cooperative Councils Innovation Network. It's lovely to have you back. So I'm Councillor Sharon Taylor. I'm leader, very proud leader of a Labour and Cooperative Council, Stevenage, which is in Hertfordshire, for those of you who don't know Stevenage. And we've got 3 top priorities in Stevenage, one of which is town centre regeneration, which is why I'm very pleased to be chairing this important panel today. Secondly is building council homes, and the third one is our cooperative neighbourhoods programme, where we're getting our residents to develop their own community plans with participatory budgeting. So lots of things going on there. Just a quick bit. I'm going to introduce the panel, but just a quick bit about the network before I do that. The Cooperative Councils Innovation Network we call it the fastest growing network in local government, and I think that's probably true. I can't actually prove it, but I think it is. We've got 109 members of the network now. We cover an area which is right across the country, Scotland and Wales, and our councils have 9 million people living in their areas and budgets of over 14 billion. We started the network. It was started by Steve Reed, and Jim McMahon and myself quickly got on board with Steve to set the network up. It started in 2012, a new model for local government based on community engagement, equal partnerships with the people we serve, and not a think tank, but action focused, with all the action in our councils based on our cooperative values. We have lots of different councils in membership, as well as other members, from the biggest councils in the country, Birmingham, Liverpool, to town and parish councils who have joined us. And we set up new memberships for associate and affiliate members who can also join us, as well as individuals. So associates are usually Labour groups who are not yet in power, but may be coming into power. And affiliates are our cooperative partners who we work with very closely. And we also have individual members for those who want to join us. We do put our money where our mouth is, because we run very light in terms of administrative costs. So the money that we raise from our member subscriptions, we use to fund policy labs and prototypes, so that we're testing out in real time some of the cooperative principles that we have in action in our councils. And then we share that good practice across the network. And we've made some great publications on asset transfer, on cooperative housing, and most recently on the fantastic work our members did on COVID. So that's what we do as a network. I'm going to bring the panel members in now. And, you know, my goodness, the high streets have taken a battering, haven't they, over the COVID time? And thank you to all the frontline workers who have kept us all going through COVID. Many of them who have put, you know, have been impacted by COVID, perhaps put themselves at risk to come to work every day. And thank you to both the councils who have supported our small businesses in the high streets by getting the grants out to them quickly, and those small businesses themselves who have you know, fought to weather the storm and come through the other side of it. And I totally support the Co-op campaign on business rates. I think it's time we made life a bit easier for some of those businesses in our high streets. So now we've got a stellar panel with us this morning. I'm going to bring them in now. And sorry, I've just lost my place in my thing. Just wait 1 moment. So we've got Donna Cornell with us this morning, who is the leader of Stroud District Council. Welcome, Donna. Donna's been a great cooperator, and we work together on many issues. Paul Gerard, the Campaign and Public Affairs Director from the Co-op Group. Joanne Cairns, who is Head of Research and Policy at Usdaw. And Joanne, I hope you'll take back our sincere thanks to all your members for everything they've done during the COVID crisis. So a fantastic panel for us today. Just to tell you a little bit about my place, because I'm very pleased to be chairing this panel today because of what we're doing in Stevenage. We've got £1 billion town centre transformation project going in my town. We've been working on it for 5 years, and it's really beginning to deliver now. The important thing about that programme is that it's been led and directed by our residents with engagement right at the very heart of it. It's a transformational programme. We're a new town. Everything wore out at the same time, and our town centre was looking very tired and sorry for itself. We've incorporated a huge, instead of just retail, we are now working on having residential, leisure, public space, workspace, and all that underpinned by a very strong cultural strategy and climate change, of course, which is important to us, right at the heart of what we're doing. We've had, right from the early days, a visitor centre. We've had probably 10,000 people visiting us in our visitor centre and in our virtual visitor centre online. So Stevenage people are informing what we do all the time. We've got together a programme of community wealth building, which is driving what we do. So creating jobs and apprenticeships and training places for the people of Stevenage through our Stevenage Works programme as we develop our town centre. That's been really successful, and we've just achieved a £715,000 grant from government to further that programme of community wealth building. We've built everything, all our co-op values are built into our procurement. So through our procurement, we're driving the social and economic investment in our community and climate change activity. And one of our major contractors in the town centre project, Mace, declared themselves net zero this year. And we too were early adopters of the Modern Slavery Charter. So as we develop our town centre and our neighbourhood centres, we are very careful to make sure we keep the principles of that charter. Alongside the culture, we've worked to, we don't own many of the shops in the town centre, and I think this is a problem for many town centres. So where we have bought some bits of property in the town centre, we've allocated meanwhile space to some of our partners, including a lovely organisation called Junction 7 Creatives, who are currently occupying one of the shops in our town centre, doing some great work on culture. So that's a quick flavour of what we're doing in Stevenage. But I'm going to hand over now to Donna to hear all about what's happening in Stroud. Over to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, Sharon. As you're probably aware, we are now the newest member of the Co-operative Innovation Network. I know you've been trying to get us to join for a while, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be part of that now, because it's going to, I'm sure, have a really positive impact and hopefully will contribute something as well. I'm going to do a bit of a presentation, and I have sort of said I've rather unfortunately managed to double book myself. We've got our local Labour meeting online this morning, so I will dip out afterwards. But if you had any specific questions about anything I speak about, just by the organisers, or you can easily find my email online anyway. I'd be very happy to have a further conversation with you. And as was said, good luck to all of those you standing for election next year. We've just been through that, so I think we've all got a really positive story to tell on the doorstep about what the Co-operative Party is doing, and always offers really practical advice, and which we've taken on board in our manifesto, which, as I'll explain a little bit, we've now translated into a 5-year council plan. So a little bit about myself, and sort of I'm a Labour cooperative council, leader of the council for a few years now. Our district in Gloucestershire is quite an interesting one, very politically diverse. We've actually been running the council as a no overall control council since 2012. The Labour, Liberal Democrats and Greens in partnership together, probably the longest standing arrangement of its kind. We call ourselves the Cooperative Alliance. So partnership and cooperation is absolutely the heart of everything we do as a council. I was reflecting on my comments today and what I was going to say, and I thought, actually, if you'd asked, funnily enough, despite the pandemic and all the pressures that have gone on, I actually think there's quite a lot of hope around about the state of our high streets now, compared to what I might have said a couple of years ago. I think there have been some interesting things that have come out of the pandemic, new ways of working, new partnerships, and a new energy. And I think particularly based around place and where we live, a desire to really sort of make a difference. Our district is a combination of small towns, rural communities. I don't even know how many high streets there would be if I added them all up, but there's certainly a lot. So that sort of community element of it is really important for us, and people care about where they live. And what we have seen is people coming. So for us as a place, that feels like there's a little bit more energy there. And the other thing that's been really significant is through the pandemic, our community hubs, which are providing support to people basically street by street, have become really significant parts of our community. And I think we're looking how we can build that resilience in going forwards in the years to come. Despite all the hope, and I think this is where the cooperative high streets campaign has been really significant, there are real major risks still to our high streets that's been picked up around ownership. And I think for us, that's one of the most significant ones, the lack of transparency. And if we've got some very difficult regeneration areas within our town centres, you've probably all got examples yourself, it might be a piece of land owned by many different owners. It might be one owner who doesn't live locally. Trying to engage with them, trying to bring that forwards as a council, local people are demanding, let's see some action on that, and yet you end up with these empty eyesores there for potentially for decades. We've got one example now, huge amount of work's going into it, but they're really, really difficult. So I think that's a real problem, and there's a lack of transparency around that. Business rates is really important for us, but I'd also say what came out through the pandemic we weren't aware of. We realised because we had to give grants to businesses, we discovered that we had the highest number of SMEs in the district within Gloucestershire. And the reason we didn't know is because a lot of those don't pay business rates. So I think there is an issue for the sort of middle businesses, but for the smaller ones who don't pay business rates, I think the pressures are slightly different. And one of the big issues I think there is around rents. There's not really a spotlight put on how much rent is demanded of businesses, and that goes back to ownership again. So I think that's quite a significant difficulty for them. The other major threat, I think, for our high streets, which is coming from government, is around permitted development rights. And now it's really easy. You don't need planning permission to convert from a retail to a residential. And the concern is we're going to end up with low quality accommodation and the worries around that. And the other issue we've seen locally is the price of land is going up. Stroud's become a popular place to live. If it gets gentrified, it becomes harder to sort of people to buy, to rent, and all the impact of that. I tried to sort of put together a few practical examples of what we can do. And I see this very much as a partnership between local government, local business, and our voluntary and community sector, which is quite strong within our district. There are things that we can do. So we've put together our 5-year council plan, and we've embedded in that. It has 3 strands around community, which covers health and wellbeing and housing. It covers, of course, the climate and ecological emergency, and it also covers supporting our local economy. And what I see is that I see this very holistically. I don't think we should take high streets as an issue and see it just about retail. It's about community. It's about the local economy. It's about, for example, within the climate, how do we strengthen, make much stronger our local supply chains, our circular economy? How do we encourage active travel within our community so that people don't have to get in the cars? There's provision for walking, cycling, and so it's safe to travel around the towns. How do we tackle health and well-being so that people have got access to healthy activities to encourage their mental and physical well-being? Housing, of course, is important that we've got access to quality, affordable housing, good green spaces within our communities as well, so people can get out and enjoy, whether it's just a green space, whether it's a play area. And again, as I mentioned about the community hubs, that there's access to support for people who need the extra bit of support, whether it's food banks or just having a friendly ear, someone can phone up if they're suffering from isolation. So I think this holistic picture is what we really need to sort of draw attention to, because it's not just about one element. So a few practical examples, because I'm sure I haven't got much time. We've got the University of Gloucestershire just won a levelling up bid. It's not within my patch, but I think it's a really good example. The Debenhams building, but Debenhams sort of had to vacate it, no longer in existence. They've now got a bid to put one of their campuses in there, and I think that's a brilliant example how we see community, or it's in this case education, moving back into the high street will be really significant for them. Locally, an example would be we've got a project now going which is working with sort of some of the social enterprises to take over an empty shop and to use that as a platform to work with young people to build up a little business so that they can start their own social enterprise. So we start to take younger people within our town so that they can start to sort of stand on their own 2 feet. It's a very practical example where the community is working together with a bit of extra funding they've had to sort of create something that hopefully will not only help the local high street, but also help local young people. Another example was something I've just done as with my own. I'm also a town councillor with our fellow Labour and cooperative councillors. We're just running a series of events over the summer. We did it this year as a pilot. We're doing it again next year, using the marketplace, helping to get local shops open to support local businesses in the evening when it's a bit of a dead time for our town, and supporting local musicians who are paid to come and to perform. So that's it. There are practical things you can yourself do as individuals. You don't necessarily need to wait for changes to happen on that one. Also, interestingly, is a local quite a big company that's involved in battery storage. They're interested in taking over an empty cafe and starting a sort of community hub to talk about renewable energy. And another interesting example just in the village next door to me, where the community have got the local shop that they run, and it's become an absolute hub. They haven't done that with any public funding, no support from us as the council, but they've just created this amazing local shop. So I think, and a final example I'll give is around the market towns in our area all coming together. We're jointly funding a post and working on a sort of collective way of having a tourism officer in position, because they're really concerned about supporting their visitor economy. So I think there are sort of many layers at which you can do practical things within your high streets to really support bringing visitors in and supporting the local economy. And as well, embedded in our local plan are things around how do we ensure for example, that sort of diversity of our local economy. So we've got social enterprises, we've got private sector, we've got cooperatives and all the rest of it. And I think it was mentioned around community wealth building. How do we lock that local wealth? And for example, as a council, a significant part for us to play is around procurement, ensuring that we still do support local businesses as much as possible. I think I mentioned a little bit about the barriers, as about ownership as a difficulty. And also as a council, we still don't have the funds and the powers as much as we would like to be able to support that. So I think going forward, so looking ahead where we're going, I think what we need to see is a combination of some quick wins and also sort of what the long-term plans are. So with the quick wins, I think we can look ahead to next year. Hopefully we might be coming out of the pandemic. What can we do in our high streets quickly to bring some really good activity back? Can we organise events? Could we organise festivals? As I've said, and we've just got some funding just to do a couple of days of a theatre festival. These are things that, particularly as councillors and candidates, you don't even need to be a councillor to get. You just need you can have a very small amount of funding to put some of these things on. And just sort of bring that life back. And there's many different ways you can do that. How could you use your green spaces? We're looking at working in a local orchard to see if we can just tidy that up a bit. Another good way of bringing in sort of community involvement. So I think that's a sort of quick win, and we can look ahead to next year. I think, what can we do to bring hope back and activity back into our high streets? And then of course the long-term thing are the really sticky, difficult issues. And I think that's where the cooperative party is doing really well to sort of push upwards. You know, how can we use our networks nationally to push up into those really significant long-term problems that are causing really major issues? And the thing that I really dislike about the political landscape at the moment is everyone has to compete against everyone else. Levelling up, towns have to compete against towns, districts have to compete against districts. That is not a good place to be. What we should be seeing is funding distributed according to need and not according to, you know, whether your MP's got more weight at Westminster to sort of lobby for the patch that's trying to get the extra funding. So that's where the cooperative party with its campaign, I think, can push much harder on that aspect. So I do sort of see, just to finish up, as I've said, I think we have to see high streets really in a holistic way at the heart of our community. There's many different ways we can support them. And if they are healthy, our communities will be healthy. And it's not just about retail. And it's, you know, the cooperative party is so well placed for this. This is so much about cooperation. It's got to have partnership right at its heart. And we can grab back some local power, so we can do things in spite of all the difficulties there are and the big forces at play. And I think, just to finish up, so I feel like there's quite a lot of hope there. many difficulties, but a lot of hope. But I do think the crucial thing is that it always has to be place-based. It has to be reflective of where you live. Everywhere is different and everywhere has its particular strengths and weaknesses. And I think building it around that local identity, which I think is for many people outside of national politics, that's where they get their sort of sustenance and their energy, and they have that powerful identity. So I think that is really important for all of us as cooperative councillors, the way to sort of engage with local people in our communities. Bit of an overview there, and unfortunately I'll have to dip out and won't be there for the debate. But anyway, it was really nice to talk to you this morning.
Thank you so much, Donna. Great to hear about all that energy and action in Stroud, and some very key points that you flagged up there about how we drive cooperative thinking, ideas, values and principles. I think the thing you said about place, that's been really intensified during the COVID crisis. People have got if anything, far more, even than they already were interested in their own places and what's happening in them. And I think that's something that's key. It's a lot to do with working from home and that sort of thing, but it's something we all need to work on. And the ownership of land point that you raised, and permitted development and all those issues, ownership of land in my town centre, we had, it was all the property was handed out to the private sector after the New Towns Commission was wound up. It took us 2 years to find out who all the owners of the property were in our town centre. We've done it, but there are 60 different ones. So, you know, these issues are really key, finding out who's got the property ownership, and we need to do that. But you've made some incredibly good and strong points there. So thank you very much, and I hope your next meeting goes very well. Thank you, Donna. Next, we're going to hear from Paul Gerard. We all know how much the Co-op Group does to support us and supporting us in local government. You do an amazing job, Paul, and it will be lovely to hear your thoughts on this very important topic.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks to the party for inviting me to speak today. As Sharon said, I'm Paul Gerard. I'm Campaign to Public Affairs Director at the Co-op. I think the first point to make is, I'm also, by the way, a board member of Cooperatives UK. I think the first point to make, and this is quite an important one, is that if you add up all the co-op shops, both Co-op Group but also independent cooperative societies like Mid-County, Central England, Southern, East of England, Scott Mid, Heart of England, if you add them all up, from what I can make, the only business that is bigger than the Co-op in terms of presence in communities, because there's over 5,000 Co-op shop fronts, is the post office. There's more Co-op shop fronts of different types, be it Group or Mid-County or Central, than there are Tesco's. So I think the first point to make is Co-ops are in the middle of just about every community in the country. I'm going to focus what I say on rates, and I know that's a key part of the party's focus. And it's worth just putting a bit of context into here, is that when we talk about retail more broadly, retail is £100 billion business. It employs 3 million people, and a third of those are under 25. And if you saw the ONS data yesterday, one of the two areas that is struggling in terms of unemployment post-COVID are young people. So the retail sector more broadly is a really important part of the UK economy. Some facts about rates. When rates were introduced in 1990, the tariff was 35p. The tariff now, it's gone up by 49%, it's now 51p. And what's happened, therefore, is that in 1990, rates raised £9 billion a year for government. In 2017-18, they raised 27 billion. It's gone up, the rates receipts have gone up by 210%. In that same period, inflation has gone up by 75%. So it's 3 times the rate of inflation is the burden being placed on retailers. And that is having an effect, and we heard from Sharon earlier, and we heard from Joanne as well, that's having an effect on high streets. In the first half of 2021, 8,700 shops have closed. Okay? And if you ask the British Retail Consortium, they will tell you that 4 out of their 5 members are looking to close stores unless business rates change. And if you look at, there is a geographical point here. If you were to go to the northeast, for example, the vacancy rate for commercial units is 20%. In the northwest, I live in Manchester, it's 18%, 17%. In London and southeast, it's 10%. So there is a regional disparity here. But the point I'm trying to make is that rates have gone up significantly. It's very significant, much faster than inflation. And it's having an effect because fundamentally rates are a disincentive to invest. And actually, if you look at the burden of rates, and again, this is a geographical point, you look at the burden that rates bring onto businesses, it disproportionately hits constituencies in the Midlands and the North. There was a piece of research done by PPI, a strategy that was released end of September, beginning of October, and it said if you looked at the top 50 constituencies with the highest business rate burden of business rates, so that's the rates liability compared to profit levels, of those 50, 80% are in the North. Moreover, if you look at that top 50 burden compared to the bottom 50 burden, it's 4 times. The burden for those in the top 50 is 4 times the burden being held by those in the bottom 50. So the rate system, as it works, just doesn't work. It is unfair geographically and by sector, and I'll come back to the by sector point. So why should we worry about that? Firstly, economic. I said before, the retail sector is a hugely important part of the UK economy, and it is in difficulty. There's 10,000 shops closing every 6 months. There's 20,000 shops closing every year. It's in real difficulty. Secondly, I think Donna mentioned this. Those physical bricks and mortar buildings, those physical shops in high streets, if we didn't appreciate them before COVID, we bloody well have done after. It was those physical shops when all of us were told to stay at home, to keep safe. And, you know, I'm grateful to Sharon and Donna for the thanks to shop workers, and indeed all of them, us door members, I'm sure. When we were all told to stay at home, they were told, they went in so we could all eat, okay? Socially, in terms of community, what you see is if you have low vacancy rates of commercial properties, you have high community well-being. Google the Co-op's community well-being index, enter your postcode and have a look at the data in there. If you have low rates of commercial premises vacancies, you have high levels of community cohesion. So if the rate system continue to make it difficult to have physical presence in high streets, those businesses will close and those high streets will have empty lots. And the last point I would make is that there's a fundamental inequity here in that large online businesses pay little, if any, rates. Retail accounts for about 5% of commercial businesses, but it pays more than 25% of the rates burden. And there is a fundamentally uneven playing field between online businesses that pay little rates and make little contribution to community cohesion because they're not in communities, and those physical businesses who are part of community and pay a very significant rate. So socially or in terms of fairness, the rate system is broke. Now, the Chancellor did make some changes in the budget a few weeks ago, and they are welcome. They won't really affect the system. They're just tinkering around the edges. And what needs to happen, and they will actually affect smaller shops, but small shops, as Donna said before, actually don't normally pay rent anyway because they have small business relief. The changes the Chancellor has made will have little difference. What we actually need is, as promised, a fundamental review of the way rates work, because it cannot be right that there continues to be a disproportionate burden on certain businesses. As part of that fundamental review of rates, so that we can get away from the fact that it's a burden and it's a disincentive to invest, particularly in those communities most in need of levelling up, as the government would call it. What needs to be taken into account is that the relationship between online and bricks and mortar buildings. If you look at Tesco, for example, Tesco's online presence has quadrupled in the last year, and that's great. And Tesco have lots of businesses in communities. But if we continue with digital and we continue to incentivize online businesses at the disadvantage of bricks and mortar businesses, those bricks and mortar businesses will close. Those shops will be empty, and communities will be significantly poorer and less cohesive as a result. So what we need here is the Chancellor to do what he promised, which is a fundamental review of business rates, and to take action on that review which addresses not the fact that the rate system is broken. If you appeal a rates decision, you're looking at 4 years before you get a decision from the VOA, but also reforms the rate system in the context of the relationship between bricks and mortar and online business. I will stop there, Sharon, and
thank you, Paul.
back to you.
But very powerful points, and you know that I'm on the working group at the LGA on business rates, and you're quite right in what you say that it's completely broken, and there's no parity between online business and bricks and mortar business. And you know, for my district, collecting £44 million of business rates and getting 2 million back, you know, it's not us that are benefiting. That's going into the treasury, and you know, they spend it on whatever they spend it on. And your point about the VOA, very well made. We haven't had a VOA decision made since 2017 here. So we've got appeals outstanding that far back. So the system is broken. We need to fix it. And, you know, I think as co-operators, let's come up with some ideas, because I don't think anyone else has got any. So, you know, it's great to see the Co-operative Party coming up with some real thinking on this. I'm going to hand over now to our next speaker, Joanne Cairns, Head of Research and Policy at USDOR. And Joanne, I would like to leave just a few minutes for questions. I've got a couple of questions in the WhatsApp box, so but it would be lovely to hear from you now. And again, thank you to all your members.
Thanks, Sharon, and thank you to the Co-op Party, not just for holding such an important discussion about the future of our high streets, but for making sure that the voice of the people working on our high streets is heard in those discussions. The retail sector is the largest private sector employer in the UK, and as Paul was saying, retail jobs are a crucial part of the economy. But unfortunately, many of those jobs have been under threat. And we heard those statistics that Paul mentioned. And it does grab the headlines when big household names like Debenhams collapse, which is an absolute tragedy for the workers who lose their jobs. And it also leaves gaping holes in our high streets. But there's also many more workers who've lost their jobs in restructuring and redundancies that are less high profile. So this isn't new. It's been going on for many years. And that's why USDOR was already calling for an industrial strategy for the retail sector and for action to support our high streets through our Save Our Shops campaign before the pandemic hit. The pandemic has exacerbated so many of the existing issues affecting our high streets. Non-food retail was hit particularly hard by lockdowns, and more people switched to online shopping, which increased by 46% in 2020. And we know that even with the shops now reopened, some of that shift to online shopping will be permanent, but we also know that shops and the people who work in them are vital parts of our communities. And as people have stayed more local, many people have valued their local shops and their local shop workers more than ever before. And I think that's something that's come through very clearly in what we've been talking about today. And we do need to be innovative about how our high streets evolve, but we mustn't write off our shops. Unfortunately, at national level, the government hasn't addressed the crisis on our high streets with the sense of urgency or ambition that's required. We've seen short-term measures to get us through the next few months at a time, which are all important and welcome, but nothing to address the fundamental structural issues like the economic framework of taxation, rents and business rates. So we're calling for a retail recovery plan that involves government at national and local level, along with businesses and unions, to create a more level playing field between online and bricks and mortar retail. To recognise the key role of our local authorities and leaders in making their town and city centres places that people really want to visit. And crucially, that plan needs to focus on the retail workforce as well. So, you know, if the government's serious about levelling up, then retail work should be properly valued with plan for training and development so that retail workers aren't being left behind by the acceleration in automation and new technology. And of course, another area where we really need a change is in protection of retail workers. And the Co-op Party has been fantastic in the way that you've supported our members and all retail workers in the campaign against violence and abuse at work. This is something we campaign about all year round, but this week's been our annual Respect for Shop Workers Week, where we bring the issue into even greater focus, and we've had brilliant support for our message that abuse isn't part of the job. Unfortunately, 92% of our members tell us they've experienced verbal abuse in the last 12 months, 70% have been threatened, 14% have been assaulted just doing their job. And in Scotland, thanks to the work of Daniel Johnson and great support from the Co-op Party, working closely with USDOR, There's now greater legal protection for shop workers. There's a specific offence of assaulting and abusing a retail worker in the course of their work. And we need that change right across the UK, and they're continuing to push for that. And it's great to know that the Co-op Party is standing alongside us on that. So, you know, if our high streets are to thrive, they need to be welcoming, safe places for everyone, and keeping retail workers safe is a key part of that. So thanks again for inviting me to speak, and thanks for all of your support for our members.
Thank you very much, Joanne, and very key points about how we support our shopping centres. And I think Donna raised the point about permitted development. I did raise that with the Minister at the District Councils Network meeting just a couple of weeks ago. It didn't seem to have occurred to them that if they turn all our shops into retail, that means that those communities are left without the facilities they need to do their shopping. And if anything, the last 18 months has certainly taught us that we need to have that local shopping facility on our doorstep. And you know, our cooperative stores have done such a wonderful job, as have many of your other outlets, in supporting our communities, not just being there for us to serve us in the shops, but also getting fully involved in the communities and doing a wonderful job. So we've got a few questions from people who are watching us online, and there's one specifically for Donna around how they've worked on their local plan, which we'll forward to Donna. She's had to leave us for another urgent meeting, but we'll get that question to Donna. I think that was Tom that asked that question. We've got another really important one, which I'd like to put to both of you, which is about empowering young people in local government policy and in how we do this work that we're doing. So Joanne, I know you've got a lot of young people working in retail, so perhaps that's something that you'd like to pick up on, how we get more young people engaged in what we do in our communities.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really important question, and I think, you know, one of the things that we do as a trade union is trying to engage more of our young members at becoming active within their trade union, which is often a route into more involvement in politically, and we do you know, as much as we can to support our young members to engage in local politics, which is really, really important. But also, you know, the fact that so many young people do work in retail, and so many of these jobs that are under threat at the moment are young people, and particularly young women as well. So the equality impact, I think, of what's happening on our high streets really needs to be, you know, high on the agenda at local and national government level, and that, you know, that is part of the case that we continue to make.
I think you're on mute, Sharon. Sharon, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. My apologies. The old trick. I just wanted to just say, in Stevenage, we've got a youth council, we've got a schools parliament, we have a youth mayor, we have council seats on council for both our youth mayor and the chair of our youth council. And we encourage them to get involved in debates. They can't vote, of course, because the constitution prevents that. And we need more councillors from younger age groups. That's what we need. The last question to you, Paul, and then we'll have to close this session, I'm afraid, which is, how optimistic do you feel about the future of our high streets?
So I am always an optimistic person. Joanne and I have done sort of panels before. We both gave evidence to the whole First Select Committee a few months back, and even though I'm optimistic, because actually I think when you look at what happened during COVID, there's a question about what in COVID would sustain. So we saw lots of things happen during COVID, you know, explosion of online, which is a good thing because it can serve particularly isolated people. I think that will sustain. I hope, and I do think it will, I think the focus on community, the focus on your place, because for many months we couldn't move. your place was often just your house, and perhaps if you're lucky, you know, the park that you went to. So I'm hopeful that that sense of community, that sense of supporting where you live, because those people will support you, I am hopeful that will stay. And I'm hopeful that what will also sustain, and it links to Joanne's point about violence and abuse against shop workers, is that the memory that when it was all pretty bloody bleak, and the only thing that you had to do was to go to the shop to buy some milk and bread, those shops were open. Very often those co-op shops, it was a co-op shop you were going to, and they were open, and the people in there were there to help you and to serve you and to say hello and to just maintain some kind of human contact. And I think if people remember that and remember what that place did, then perhaps we'll start to invest and use our high streets, because in the end, none of those businesses are charities. They have to be commercially viable. The commercially viable is people say, actually, I'm going to choose to shop locally. I'm going to choose to go to the local butchers or the grocers or the local convenience store. And I'm going to treat the people there with respect. So I am hopeful, because I really hope that what happened during COVID keeps in people's minds and they take a different choice.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think that's the absolutely key thing. I'm always hopeful, while I know there are co-operators out there thinking about how we do things better and how we share the both the responsibility, but also the thinking about how we take things forward. And there are good things coming down the line, and I see some great thinking in the cooperative movement on this. So thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you to all the people who've asked questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but it's very good to hear from you all. And we do always have people in our movement that inspire us every day. And our next session is led by one of those people for me. She's a great champion of the environment, but she's also a fantastic councillor. I'm going to hand over now to Rosa Bolger. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Sharon. What a lovely, warm introduction. It's always so great to see you, and wonderful to end up on so many panels together so regularly. So thank you for everything you're doing. Yeah, welcome to the next session. This is Campaigning with the Co-op Party. I mean, what are we if we're not campaigners at heart? So what a fabulous session to chair this morning. So I'm Rosa Bolger, as Sharon mentioned. I currently sit in opposition as a councillor on West Oxfordshire District, but I'm also the former leader of Witney Town Council. I was the first woman leader there when we took control. And we're now at Witney Town Council a proud member of the Co-op Council's Innovation Network. I've shared many times before how we turned our true blue constituency and our little rural market town of Witney, and we painted it red and purple, and by taking control of our town council that had been conservative for longer than anyone could remember, and our campaigns of cooperative values are ongoing, and our strength within the community continues to grow. And then last May, although working alongside Labour groups, Labour co-op groups across the other districts in Oxfordshire, we managed to overturn our county council, forming a Labour co-op, Lib Dem and Green coalition, ousting the Conservatives that had always been in control of that council. And I'm not just saying that, they really had always been in control of it since it was formed. So it's wonderful. And the councillors on our new county council are doing an incredible job. We have a fantastic panel of cooperators for you this morning, so I'm going to move straight on and introduce them. First of all, we have James Butler, who is Campaigns Officer for the Co-op Party.
Good morning, and thank you, Rosa. I'm James Butler, the Campaigns Officer for the Co-op Party, and over the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to give you a sort of greatest hits of what you can do to bring about more cooperation in your local community and in the country. And the best bit of that is that there's an activity for everyone, whether you're a member, a branch officer, a candidate, a councillor in power or in opposition. You know what, did I say that was the best bit? Well, it'll be my best bit, but the very best bit is that the people coming after me will be giving you some real life practical examples of how they've turned some of this stuff into real change in their community. So don't be shy about that. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. I encourage you to copy what they've done and what they're doing. Now, a fair bit of what I'm going to say is either in our 12 ideas, and I think we'll be hearing about some of that later today, or in our policy document, and that policy documents rather. And that means you can find all the information, all the background, and all the tools to do some of this campaigning on our website. So to business, modern slavery. We've now got well over 100 councils which have signed up to our Charter on Modern Slavery or have incorporated it into their policy. And those councils range from some of the smallest parish councils in the UK to the UK's second biggest council in Birmingham. Have a look at our website and see if your council is listed as having signed it. And if it's not, get campaigning on it. Get a commitment in your local government manifesto for the elections. Use the standard templates for letters to the paper, our petitions, our model motions. The second thing I'd like to touch on, is food justice. And we're going to hear in a minute from the absolutely fabulous councillor in Derby, Joanna West, about what she's been doing. The big picture is what we're encouraging councils to do, councils and communities to do, is adopt a three-tier approach to tackling food insecurity. Number one, councils and communities should have a food partnership. Number two, they should adopt a food plan. And number three, they should seek to measure the extent of food insecurity in the area. And we've got a great document on our website, Beyond Food Banks. Have a read of it and get campaigning on it. And if you think that package is perhaps too ambitious for you, or you're not in power and can't get our model motion in Beyond Food Banks passed, then have a look at the great website, foodjusticefinder.com, and see what actions you can do on that website. Additionally, have a look at take up of Healthy Start vouchers in your area. There's plenty that you can do individually and collectively to campaign on that issue. Number three, high streets. And this is a thing which has been running through this morning. If you've tuned in, you will have heard the panel talking about it, and you've heard the Mayor of Liverpool about how important high streets and town centres are to their communities. And we're delighted that Liverpool was one of the very first councils to pass our motion on high streets. They now sit alongside great kind of exemplars of cooperation in Salford, Newcastle, Lewisham. Take our model motion to your Labour Party branch, to your GC, to your Labour group, tailor it to local circumstances, get it passed, get it discussed. Love it, list it. We will hear from the wonderful councillor Alex Patterson very shortly about how they've used the issue of assets of community value in Medway to rally their community. So if you're a council candidate or a councillor knocking on doors over the next couple of months, have a listen to what they've been doing in Medway and have a think about whether you've got assets in your local community which could do with additional protection. Now, it could be you've done all that. I don't think there are any councils which have done quite all of them, but if you think you've done all of them, have a think about how you can use the principles and values of cooperation in your council work. And we'll hear very shortly from the amazing Councillor Emma Monkman about how she's been doing just that to combat the effects of climate change. Now, Rosa, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I hope some of you got my Strictly Come Dancing references in there. And if you did, you won't be surprised if I kind of wrap up my presentation by encouraging everyone to keep campaigning.
Thanks very much, James. I think we're just disappointed you didn't give us a 12, but maybe we'll save that for next year's local government conference, hopefully in person. So thanks so much, James. Up next, we have an incredible woman, an incredible sister who's a real inspiration to me, actually, in the cooperative movement. I'm really pleased to introduce this morning my good friend, Councillor Joanna West of Derby City Council. Joanna chairs the party's Women's Network Steering Committee and is also a mentor on the Chris Harries mentoring scheme. In the first lockdown, Jo set up a partnership between Central England's co-ops and Membership and Community Council, I think it was, and Derby City Council to get food parcels to people unable to leave their house during the lockdown. This work continues, and she continues to work on food justice. So you don't need to hear any more from me. Let's hear from Joanna.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you. Firstly, I have to apologise if the sound isn't great. I wanted to be in two places at once, so I'm at a community centre in Leicester about to go out canvassing straight after this session. So I will try to be here for the whole session, but if the sound goes or my internet goes, please forgive me. It's not that I don't want to be here. So as Rosa and James have said, I'm Joanna West. I'm a councillor in Derby, been a councillor since 2015 and re-elected in 2019 as Labour and Co-operative councillor. My introduction to the Co-operative Party was 3 years ago. I didn't know anything about the Co-op Party, but I was asked to second a motion to full council about the Charter Against Modern Slavery. As James has mentioned, this was early days and now there's over 100 councils signed up. I joined the Co-op Party after reading up about it. I felt like I'd found the reasons for seeking election in the first place. I actually joined from the front bench of our council chamber after having the motion passed. I was that excited. So after joining the Co-op Party, I became involved with Central England Cooperatives Membership and Community Council. And it was through this role that last year, as Rosa has said, I helped work in the community hub that was set up between Central England Cooperative and the City Council. I felt like my ability to speak council and co-op was a real bonus there. And it helped get food to those who were isolating but unable to leave the house. It is something that still continues, and I'm thrilled that Central England Co-op have put so many great things in place to help their members access food now. So obviously the pandemic, furlough and redundancies added to the many issues we already knew about people getting sufficient food. And having worked in store and as a councillor speaking to people every week who needed help, I was keen to do more to help. So I looked to the Co-op Party. The Co-op Party have lots available to you as a candidate or councillor. I found the campaigns that they focus on and promote are relevant to all communities and to all people. There's always something that resonates. So the Co-op Party had launched their food justice campaign back in 2019, and issues relating to food hadn't gone away. We all know they still haven't. So last year, just after the half-term holidays, I had been helping locally provide food to children in receipt of free school meals. Just after that, I attended annual conference, and it was there that I heard another cooperative society mention Healthy Start vouchers. I didn't really know what the vouchers were, but they sounded useful. I texted our then president there and then and asked if we accepted these vouchers, and if we did we have the uplift that the East of England Cooperative Society were doing. We didn't at the time, but we did soon afterwards. So I'd heard about Healthy Start vouchers. I found out more about them. They're used to buy fruit, vegetables, pulses, milk. They provide crucial access to healthy food for those who need it most, qualifying pregnant women, babies and toddlers. And I decided that if I, as a councillor, didn't know about them, others probably wouldn't either. So I worked with the wonderful James Butler, used the information that the party provided. There are handy links on the Food Justice Finder website set up by the party, and I found out what the take-up was locally. It was pretty poor. It was worse than I'd expected. It was less than 50% take-up locally. So normally these vouchers would be promoted at surgeries, libraries, Sure Start centres, health centres, etc. But due to the pandemic, these places weren't getting the footfall they would do normally. And due to the government, some of those places have closed for good. No matter what they say, we invented Sure Start. It seemed a shame that they weren't all being claimed, and finding out locally over £7,000 every week wasn't being claimed was a huge eye-opener. And quite horrendous, really. This is £7,000 that people would hugely benefit from. So in February this year, I took a motion to our full council, calling them to work with others to promote the take-up of Healthy Start vouchers and ensuring that they continue promoting those until the take-up reaches at least 75%. When I took the motion, the take-up was just under 49%. It's gone up now. It's over 50%, but there's still a lot to do. The key thing that I think we did that made the difference was putting into the motion the target, the 75% take-up target. So the council has agreed to keep promoting the Healthy Start vouchers. It's not just we'll send one tweet out, it's we will keep going until we reach 75% take-up. It's going to take a long time, I know that. What I did alongside the motion was contact my local paper and talk to them about it. And they wrote an article before I took the motion to full council. They wrote an article after I took the motion to full council when it was passed. And I'm soon going to be contacting them to say this is still not being taken up to the extent that we need it to be taken up. and I'm very hopeful that they will write another article. We have a decent relationship. So the other thing I did was share everything on social media. You want to make sure that you reach as many people as you can. I continue to highlight the cooperative difference of both the party and my local society, and the media attention resonated locally with my community. A lot of people now know me from the work I've done in the last 18 months. The East Midlands event that I'm at the moment, I was just introduced to someone as a co-op person. No, actually the co-op person, which was super. So when I was asked to talk about campaigns, I thought, but I haven't done anything. I've just used the information that the party provided to me. And that was why I decided to say just that. Yes, I did the work, but the party provided me with the information. They provided me the links to the figures, and that's what I want to stress today. So without sounding like a sponsored advert, the Co-op Party have so many resources available. They have amazing staff, they have an amazing website. There are always ways of getting in touch with other candidates, councillors, head office themselves. So you can head to the website, party.coop, click get involved. You'll find everything there. You'll find model letters, you'll find petitions. You can also follow the party. Sorry, it's getting very noisy. You can also follow the party on social media because there are always great posts to share. You don't have to do anything. It is all there for you, though obviously you can tailor it to suit your local area. So as James has said, don't reinvent the wheel. We all stand on the shoulders of those who've gone before us. Cooperation exists for a reason. It's one of the most important of the 7 principles. Share best practice, work with others, don't fight alone. We're stronger together. You'll have huge support from the Cooperative Party, and you can use that to your advantage. Thank you for listening, and I will mute now and hand back to Rosa.
Thanks, Joanna. That was really wonderful, and as always, inspiring to hear you speak about the work you're doing in Derby and how it continues after lockdown, which I think many of us find is really necessary. Some of you may know that at the start of lockdown, I started a baby bank with fellow Labour Co-op councillor Joy Aitman here in Witney, and I suspect, similar to Joanna, we've seen the need for it grow and grow and grow. We were a temporary measure. We thought we'd set up as just a group of volunteers for a few months, and now we're on the verge of becoming a proper registered charity. So it shows how much support is really needed, and actually how much damage this government's done that is having to be repaired within communities. And that's a wonderful focus for the Co-op Party to work on. I'm going to move on now. I know Joanna's short of time. There are some specific questions for her, but if she's around at the end, we'll go with those. But if not, let's move on. We've got 2 more wonderful speakers. So our next speaker is Councillor Emma Monkman. Emma was elected to Belper Town Council and also to Amber Valley Borough Council in May 2019. She's now the deputy leader of the Amber Valley Borough Council Labour Group. And is an environment and climate change academic specialising in policy and renewable energy. Sounds incredibly interesting, Emma. Can't wait to hear from you.
Hi, thank you, Rosa. That's great. Thanks. How lovely to be here, to be talking with such other inspiring people. I feel absolutely blessed. So as mentioned, I was elected in May 2019, and like Rosa, we turned the local council from blue to red, and did the same at Amber Valley Borough Council as well. And in doing so, inherited councils that weren't in a very good shape. I think there's a theme here. One thing that happened, we were elected in May 2019, and in November 2019, Belper, where I live and represent, was flooded. We have a beautiful river running through the middle of Belper, but contrary to that, there was absolutely no flood work in place, no flood plan, no flood wardens, no scheme, nothing. So November 2019, we were hit quite badly, as other areas around the country were, with flooding. So as a response to that, because there was nothing in place prior to that, I've been working, it's actually taken over most of my council life, working for developing our flood response scheme, training flood wardens, developing a plan for the town, a position statement which talks about all the things that impact flooding for our town. Because despite the fact that we have a river running through it, which does flood, we also get runoff coming down from the hills, and we have a lot of development going on around the area at the moment. Some of that in green fields and some of that in green belt. We've got, complex situations about planning, etc., but not necessarily being considered about the impact that that's going to have on flooding. So it's been a very complex piece of work. But one, I live very near the river, so I can look out of my window and see how it's flooding. And I do spend a lot of my time looking at the river, I find, at the moment. At the moment, it's a dry, clear day, so we're okay. But it doesn't take much for us to have start having problems. We've got circa 200 houses in the area that are at risk of flooding when we have flood levels like we had in November 2019. On the back of that, we had flooding again in January 2021. So some people, we still have 2 properties that are unlivable since November 2019. So that's 2 families that have had to live elsewhere since then and are still not back in their homes. So it's worth spending all this time on, is what I'm trying to say. It is a massive, massive concern for a river town like ours. And we have 4 areas that are prone to flooding. So we need quite a few wardens, and that's another thing that we've been setting up, wanted a mixture of those being councillors and also people in the community, which has been great. We got a great response from that and a lot of people stepping forward to help. But it is a huge piece of work. And I think it's something that I had no idea when I was campaigning. We wrote a manifesto of what we wanted to be elected on, and it never featured in that. But actually, it's what I'm spending as a climate and environment academic is something that I'm spending quite a lot of time looking at. So that's all about flood response. But being a climate and environment academic, I don't want to just leave it to that. I want to see what we can do to mitigate and to reduce flooding on towns like ours. So an idea came to me to develop what I'm calling the Lower Derwent Flood Forum. So Lower Derwent is the river area that we're on, because flooding doesn't just happen in Belper. And I know that probably sounds like a silly thing to say, but that's sometimes how it's treated. That we've got our area and this is being flooded, but actually. This is a unique opportunity, I think, to work together collaboratively with the councils up and down the river on an environmental issue that is here and now. The long-term range for a river town like ours is that we will suffer from flooding and drought. So those are the 2 systems that we will see as our climate changes. We have a lot of farming and agriculture in our area, so we have to take these things into consideration. How can we bank water so that we have water for those drought periods? But how can we ease the flooding that comes through, which was absolutely massive in November 2019? I really understood the power of the river, and actually from my window could see it creeping closer. I avoided it narrowly, but others didn't. So it's a huge issue and something that I find is very real. All those people who perhaps haven't always got on board with the climate argument, you can see that from your front window that we've had 2 big events in the last 2 years. And I personally think that we're probably not far away from another one. So we keep increasing our budget to make sure that we can respond however we need to at the time. But it's been, as I say, that linking back to the Lower Derwent Flood Forum, what we're looking to do there is have regular meetings with the agencies that are concerned with flooding, so Environment Agency, all the tiers of councils that we have in our area, the utilities companies, the blue light responders, and just work together to see how our response needs to be, but also looking at mitigating and things that we can perhaps do further upstream. So natural resolutions to beavers are being introduced into our area, which is brilliant. So could we do that further upstream? Can we? The nearest flood gauge that we have here is about 15 miles away, so that's no use either. So we need, we really need to make sure that we've got better systems in place. But I sometimes think that flooding just gets lumped into sort of local resilience forum conversations about lots of other things, but actually it's massive and it's going to be massive and it needs to have its own place, hence the forum. So we can just sit down and talk about flooding, what we're doing locally and in our areas, but how we can work together and potentially put in place one thing we can do is raise precepts on local councils. I'm not trying to put the burden onto the taxpayer, but if we can take some money from each council, push that further upstream and look at repeating peat bogs, introducing beavers, introducing catchment areas where we can bank water instead of it flooding straight through. Because at the end of our river, it goes thumping through to Derby, and we've heard from Joanne, who's a councillor there. So we need to make sure that we don't just put up flood defences here and then it all goes racing even further into Derby. I think we need to all look together, come together, and have a cooperative approach to flood management and resilience, and how we can mitigate those levels in future. But it's become a huge part of my role, and I think in terms of campaigning, how you can look at that, I think some places that I've spoken to have really great flood plans in place, and they've had them in place for a long time, but lots don't. So I was just wondering about, if you wanted to run a campaign in your local area about environmental issues, you could perhaps look at the long-term forecast for your area, the long-range predictions of what climate change will do to your town. And you could go to your local council, even if you're not a local councillor at the moment, and say, have you got in place a flood watch scheme, or have you got in place, what have you got in place for these things? So you can campaign on real life issues that are happening today. Flooding is here. That's not just something that we're going to look at a futuristic program and flooding will be in the distance. It's here now, and how's it going to affect where you live? Because there will undoubtedly be developments that are happening that can change the flood waters coming through. And I think that there's also something we can do about campaigning on planning, because I've been researching, as I say, flood mitigation strategies, and one that I think is a really good idea, and I'm keen to sort of have my own little campaign on this one, is that every new house is built with a water butt, quite a bigger one, and what that can do is, when we do have those absolute thumping deluges, if your water butts are empty on those properties, because if people use them and build them into their everyday life for watering their gardens or rinsing the path, or I don't know, you could even use them to wash your car if you're not too bothered about it being pristine. But if all that water can go into those water butts on each property, then it would take some of it out of it and just reduce that coming through. And I think it's initiatives like that I find really exciting. Also, porous surfaces instead of paths everywhere on new developments, and dare I say it, the dreaded plastic grass, which we need to have some serious conversations about what that does, let alone just to flooding, but to biodiversity and everything else. So there's lots we can do on this, lots and lots and lots. And I find that really exciting, and I find it really exciting to work with the different councils along my area, which could be something that you could do and run a campaign on where you are, and be more than happy if anybody wants to get in touch and find out what we've been doing here and how we've had to pull together quite a significant flood response in a really short space of time. But any questions, please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emma. It's really wonderful to hear you talk about that and to have so much focus on flooding. In Witney, we have the beautiful Windrush River running through the middle of our town, probably very similar to your town. And, again, last year had Christmas Eve flooding, which is never ideal when people are having to leave their homes on Christmas Eve, which is not probably how they plan to spend their Christmas. So it's wonderful to hear of all of your ideas, and I think we should probably connect together and talk about what we can do in those good cooperative ways. Next up, we have a wonderful speaker, Councillor Alex Patterson from Medway. I've known Alex several years now, and one of the things I really appreciate about Alex is not just all the great work he does in Medway, but the way he shouts about it. People know what they're doing in Medway, and that's a really great thing for our party and our movement. So Alex is going to talk to us today about the Love It or List It campaign. So Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Rosa. That's very kind. You're obviously one of my keen followers on social media, where I do try to shout about what we're doing here in Medway. I'm the Labour and Cooperative Councillor for Rochester West. I was elected a by-election in 2018, and then in 2019, after our all-out elections, returned 21 Labour and Cooperative councillors. We became a Labour and Cooperative group, and so we're really pleased that we are able to put cooperative values into action. I'm going to continue the watery theme, but a little bit downstream from Emma, because in the Medway Estuary, the river is actually something that we really celebrate. It's a positive thing, because the Chatham Docks is worth £258 million every year to our local economy. It employs 800 people directly. It employs around 1,500 people in total in ancillary industries, but it's actually at risk of closure. Now, just to be clear, and I realise that there's already confusion in hearing a Glaswegian who's a councillor in Rochester talking about Chatham Docks, which is actually in Gillingham. But this is not the historic dockyard. This is the remaining working third of the Chatham Naval Dockyard that was built in 1567, the birthplace of HMS Victory, and closed by Thatcher in 1984, at which point a third of it was carved off to become the tourist attraction, which is the fantastic historic dockyard Chatham. Another third for housing, another third for the working Chatham Docks area. Now, this is a thriving piece of Medway industry, and its worth is demonstrated most recently in the Crossrail project in London, where we actually benefited from building a factory to make 100,000 concrete sections to line the tunnels in the eastern part of the Crossrail project. And the beauty of building them in Medway was they could be floated down by barge along the Medway, along the Thames to Canning Town, and keeping freight traffic off the road. So this is not just a dockyard which has a great history. It's got a great future, but it's at risk because of two competing issues. One, that Peel Ports, the owner, want to close it in 2025 and turn it over to housing and mixed commercial use. But they can't do that yet because it's not been designated as such. It's currently designated for employment and port operations only. The catch is that Medway Council has not put in place a new local plan since 2003. Now, that's pretty farcical in any event, but when you consider the fact they've had a handsome majority on the council in all that time, it shows you just how divided they are about how we go about delivering the 28,000 homes which we have been given as our government target to build in 2037. And so the council is left to sort of decide which section of its voters it's going to upset, and it really hasn't come to any conclusions on that. Most recently, a couple of months back, we were meant to actually go to consultation on a draft local plan, which had to be pulled at the last minute because they realised they were going to be defeated by some troublesome backbenchers on it, combined with the Labour and Co-operative group. So we're really no further forward, but what we do know from that draft local plan is that it was going to designate the area around Chatham Docks for housing and commercial use. So that mixed use designation would allow Peel Ports to go ahead with its plans to close by 2025. Now, there's been a really healthy campaign against it because these businesses are successful businesses. We've got businesses like ArcelorMittal, and we have a very active group called the Association of Chatham Docks Commercial Operators, and they've put together all sorts of fantastic glossy brochures like this one, which is highlighting the campaign against the closure. But the irony is that what may well be the undoing of Peel Ports is the Co-op Party's Love It List It campaign, because last week that same group, encouraged by Medway Labour and Co-operative Group, put in an application to the council to list the Chatham Docks area as an asset of community value, which is something that, as James has highlighted in previous discussions, is something that is a provision under the Localism Act, which will allow a community group to designate an area as an asset of community value, and then in the event of a sell-off, gives them a sort of limited right to pull together a bid within 6 months to buy the asset themselves. Now, it's by no means a silver bullet, but it may well prove to be enough of a fly in the ointment that in order to get the local plan through, the council have to capitulate on this. And that's a fantastic example of cooperative campaigning in action, that despite the deep pockets of the people who are campaigning to save these jobs, that actually what may well prove to be the best thing that they can do is something which actually any group of 21 people or more can make that sort of application to the local council to have an asset listed. And it's something that, you know, it can be applied in so many different circumstances. We've had sports centres and public golf courses designated in Medway. We've had pubs designated. In my own ward, the council designated half of the local museum to be sold off. And we didn't have such a designation, and there was a real fear that that asset was going to be bought by a notorious local nightclub owner and Tory donor. And because we managed to cause a stink about that, we ended up putting them off to such an extent that it ended up being bought by a local arts group. And that's now a great asset, but that was no thanks to the council. And it shows that you need to act before the issues develop rather than waiting until everything has gone wrong and the asset is up for sale. So it's absolutely something that can be applied in different areas in different ways. It doesn't have to be about jobs. It can be a community centre. It can be a library building. It can be all sorts of things. And, you know, it's something that I think cooperative councillors up and down the country could really make use of as a campaigning tool.
Thanks so much, Alex. I mean, as I said at the start, it's always wonderful to hear the work that's happening in Medway with your fantastic team there. You can see some more about the Love It Holistic campaign on party.coop. So do take a look on the website if you're interested in finding out some more. We're going to move on to a few questions. We're running slightly behind time, so we're gonna or slightly ahead of time, I suppose. So we're going to move on to a few questions for the rest of the panel if they're still there. Thank you very much. Wonderful. So the first question: austerity by this government. Many thousands of people are struggling with food and other basic needs. This is from somebody who's running a food bank. How can they get more support from the party, they ask? James, do you want to come in on this one first?
Yeah, I mean, it's from the information you provided, it's a little bit vague. So get in touch is the ultimate thing, and let's have that discussion about how we can help. As Joanna said earlier, what we've got is a reservoir of knowledge and experience. I've got some wonderful colleagues who work on policy, got some wonderful colleagues who work in local government. If there is good stuff going on in local government, we'll know about it, and we can pick and choose and direct you towards really good stuff. There's also an interrelationship. Like, we want to hear from people about your challenges and your successes, so we can highlight those and hopefully inform our policy and campaign activity.
Thanks, James. And just to concur with that, there's some wonderful officers within the Co-op Party. I know our Labour Co-op group has had a lot of support from them in the past on specific campaigns and also just on general council work. So it's wonderful to have that as such an easily accessible resource. All their contact details are on the website. I'll move on to another question, and this is a question that is very close to my heart, actually, because it's something I've been banging on about for a long time, and that's the importance of opposition Labour and Co-op groups. So the question here asks, how do we go about making some action within council and moving these campaigns from opposition? Who wants to take that one? Emma, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm in opposition at the moment. We were in control and we're now in opposition. You can still get things through. I think it's about it's how you do it, isn't it? It's absolutely how you do it. I think if you, for example, for me, it's usually environmental motions that I want to get through. So I will speak to the cabinet member for environment in the other group and just make sure that it's something that they can get on board with. And I think there's a way of making everybody look good coming out of the council with whatever you're trying to get through. And I think there's also a way of behaving how you would want people to treat you. And so I behave respectfully to the people who are in control at the moment. I work with them and also show a body of evidence that it isn't just something that I want. So I'll take that motion with members of the public who've suggested it to me. And my perception is, even though I'm in opposition, I'm still an elected councillor, the same that they are. So I'm still getting members of the public who I represent coming forward to me and asking me to take forward issues on their behalf, and it benefits everyone. So we've managed to get some motions through whilst we've not been in control. One was about glyphosate and the liberal use of that through the council. Another one's about a climate emergency working group motion and things like that. So I think there's ways of taking everybody with you and doing the right thing. And I think it's just really about sort of working respectfully and collaboratively on those big issues, because if you wait, they may not come around otherwise. So I just feel that whether I'm in power or I'm not, I'm still an elected member of that council. I still have people I need to represent, and there are still big and important issues that we need to look at and go for it.
Can I come in on that, Rosa?
I'd love you to, Alex. I was going to come to you next. Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like Emma, we're in opposition. We are in contention to take control at the next election, which makes things slightly trickier in the sense that we have a council that doesn't really want to give us any victories that we can claim as our own. If they do make changes, they tend to vote down our motion and then try and quietly push things through at a later date, because they can't deny that a lot of our suggestions are very good ideas. But I think as cooperators, what we should also be about is about enabling communities, and that's where I think we can really turn the screw on Tory councils, because what they do listen to are voters. So if you can enable community groups to take on these campaigns, if you can facilitate things like the Love It List It campaign, like the Food Justice campaign, and give your backing to them and tell them how to do it. Because even before I was a councillor, I would say probably my greatest success against Medway Council came about 10 years ago when we overturned their decision to close my children's infant school. And that was born out of it being a grassroots campaign that was very hard to pin down as a political one. So I think that's a benefit of being a cooperative councillor, is that we are at the heart of our communities and we know how to empower them, and that's what we're about. We're about building community power.
Absolutely, quite right. We talk a lot about community engagement within the Co-op Party, and that is one of our core cooperative values. Talk to people, bring them on board. Absolutely. So just one last question, Alex, if you want to start with this one. What are people's top tips? This is a question from Alex. No, it's not. It's for Alex. What are people's top tips for getting others on side from outside of the Co-op Party? So from other political persuasions, I think that question means.
So I suppose that does sort of follow on a little bit from what I was talking about, in that we simply have to point out the common sense of what we're saying, because I think at a street level, that's what the Co-op Party's values are actually values that are widely shared. I think we represent a majority of people in this country, even if they don't realise it. There's very little that we say to people that they can argue with. If you talk to football fans about whether a football club should be owned by the people who support them, people say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. When you talk about food justice, they say, yeah, that does sound fair enough, that in the 6th richest country in the world, people shouldn't be going hungry. And if you talk to them about an asset of community value, and you say to them, do you think it's right that those with the deepest pockets can simply walk in and ride roughshod over communities? And they'll say no. So I think, the best we can do is to represent what common sense values we have. I'm so proud to be a Labour and Cooperative councillor. I think, if anything, the Cooperative Party's campaigning arm has been really inspirational, even more so on a policy level than the Labour Party in the last couple of years, just in providing us with very practical campaigns that you can take on the doorstep. And that's what people do appreciate. They don't want to have a discussion on the doorstep about foreign policy necessarily. They don't want to talk about issues that you've got no control over, but they do want to talk about the difference that a Labour and Co-operative Council would make. And until we have that control, what difference you're going to make to their area as an opposition Labour and Co-operative councillor.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Alex. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up this session here. We're running slightly behind time, but thank you so much for joining us, Alex, Emma and James. Wonderful to have, actually, I realise, a panel of opposition cooperative councillors. So how wonderful to see that it is possible to achieve some great things even from opposition. So next up, I'm really pleased to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Steve Reid MP. So Steve was a key member of Sir Keir Starmer's successful leadership campaign. Following on from that election, Keir appointed him to the Shadow Cabinet as the Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. I'm interested to find out, Steve, if you're still called that or if you're just called Levelling Up now, but we'll get to that. So prior to entering Parliament, Steve was the elected leader of Lambeth Council, where he pioneered the cooperative council model that gave communities a bigger say in local decision making, and he also introduced the UK's first public health approach to reducing violent youth crime. In 2013, Steve was awarded an OBE for his services to local government. We're hugely happy to have him here with us today. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rosa. It's fantastic to join you this morning, and I've really, is it still this morning? Yeah, just about. I've really been enjoying listening to the other speakers this morning as well. I've long been a member of the Co-op Party, and it's great to see the movement doing so well and the party doing so well right now. So, power is something we don't talk about enough across the Labour movement, in my opinion. That's why it's so important that our Co-op Party is now championing community power in action, as we've been hearing about this morning. And here's why it matters so much. Since 2010, the Conservative government has deepened the gulfs of inequality that divide our country and cap people's aspirations. That's led to visible inequalities of health, wealth, education and opportunity. But we don't talk enough about the inequalities of power that allowed them to happen in the first place. If people had the power to make change on their own terms, they would never have allowed this centralising Conservative government to lay waste to their communities in the way that has happened. Ours is one of the most over-centralised countries in the world. That's why, despite being the 6th biggest economy on the planet, we also have many of the poorest regions in Europe. People in the regions don't have the power to direct the investment, bring in the infrastructure and develop the skills that attract employers and bring in good, well-paid, secure jobs. Put simply, Whitehall doesn't understand Liverpool or Coventry or Hartlepool anything like as well as local people do. So why do we let Whitehall control all the decisions? It's held our country back. We can't spread prosperity out unless we push power down. And that's why Keir Starmer's asked Gordon Brown to lead a commission that I hope will be proposing the most radical programme of devolution our country's ever seen. It's high time to open up power across this country. Too many people have lost faith in politics. And no wonder when you can never trust a word our Prime Minister says. He promised to deliver high-speed rail to Leeds, and then this week he's dropped it. He promised never to increase national insurance contributions, and then he hiked them up. He's handed out multi-billion-pound contracts to his wealthy mates without tender or competition. He's tried to cover up corruption by one of his own senior MPs, then just this week watered down Labour's proposals to ban dodgy second jobs. This is a Prime Minister with no integrity and no moral compass, and he's bringing the whole of politics into disrepute. Boris Johnson is a walking lesson in why we desperately need to get power out of the centre, where Conservative politicians can corrupt it, and into the hands of people in their own communities. Johnson's Conservatives have shattered trust in politics and politicians, and the only way to fix that now is to show that our party trusts the people to take back control for themselves. Now, shifting power from one set of politicians to another won't be enough. Community power is the only way forward to restore trust and accountability to our politics, whether it's in the workplace, over public services, or in our communities. Our job is to show this country there's a better way based on opening up power, and that is the heart of what our Co-op Party has always been about. As Rosa was saying, I was a council leader before I became an MP, and we launched the country's first cooperative council. That's now grown into a huge movement, the biggest, I think, in Labour local government, with over 70 councils and Labour groups who have joined the Co-op Councils Innovation Network, so ably led by my very good friend, Councillor Sharon Taylor from Stevenage. There are many co-op councillors taking part in our conference today, and many candidates who I hope will be elected next May. And as we build towards the next general election and the hope of a Labour government, you are the front line in showing our country what community power really means. In Plymouth, co-op councillors launched over 30 community-owned sustainable energy co-ops, saving the planet, cutting fuel costs and promoting local employment all at the same time. Our co-op councillors in Oldham set up an ethical care standard to make sure the council never funds providers who abuse their care workers by refusing to pay them for travel time between clients or cut visit times down to levels that mean care is impossible to provide. We've been hearing a lot about high streets this morning, and in Barking and Dagenham, the Labour and Cooperative Council there is giving residents control of their high street and the community with a programme called Everyone Every Day that makes sure communities have premises to meet and run their own projects from. In Stevenage, the council's creating cooperative neighbourhoods where residents have a bigger say over the way the community develops and the services they use. Here in Croydon, we've launched a charter for community control, drawing on the best examples of community power from across the country to set out a roadmap for how we can transform our borough by harnessing the insights and creativity of our own community. These are just some of the examples that we can all learn from, and there are so many more where cooperative values are transforming lives despite the funding cuts that keep raining down from this Conservative government. And it's worth a quick look at just how devastating those cuts have been and will continue to be. Don't believe the Tories when they say austerity's over. Over the past 11 years, they've cut council funding by 40% on average, and in some cases, it's nearly twice that level. They've clobbered the 10 poorest councils with funding cuts 18 times bigger than the 10 richest. That's why we've seen the closure of record numbers of libraries, youth clubs and Sure Start centres, and savage cuts to family support, mental health services, social care and child protection. They've made our country more unequal and left us to pay the price of inequality through rising levels of crime, mental ill health and family breakdown. The Conservatives aren't levelling our country up, they're pulling our country apart. When the Chancellor told us his budget would provide more money for local services, he forgot to say it wasn't even enough to fix the social care crisis. So everything else will get cut harder to plug the gap. When he told us he was ending the public sector pay freeze, he forgot to say he wasn't providing the funding for a pay rise. So when you're out campaigning between now and next May, don't forget to remind your voters that thanks to Rishi Sunak's council tax bombshell and Boris Johnson's broken tax promises, every resident will be paying more but getting less under the Conservatives. And don't let the Tories devolve the blame for their cuts onto your Labour council. Let's put the blame where it belongs, back in Downing Street. The government likes to talk about levelling up, but in reality, they're doing the opposite. They've broken the link between hard work and fair pay with the worst decade for pay growth since the 1930s, and yet bankers' bonuses are bigger today than when the financial crisis struck. How much better if we supported the co-op sector to expand so workers get a bigger say and a fairer share over the value that their work creates. The Conservatives have clobbered families with the highest level of personal taxation for 70 years that's choking off local economic recovery. They refuse to fund kids' catch-up after the pandemic, and they failed to fix the social care crisis. So they're still leaving older people facing losing their home if they want decent care. and they're trashing our high streets by refusing to level the playing field on tax between local high street shops and the online retail giants. And they're handing more control to developers so they can create dead zones on the high street by turning shops into low quality flats that can never be shops again. Now, if we look at all we've been through this past year and a half since the first lockdown, the light in all the darkness has been our communities, neighbours who set up mutual aid groups to look out for each other, people who stood on their doorsteps to clap the underpaid and undervalued heroes on the front line, the work our Co-op party is doing to tackle food insecurity. What's clear is that our communities are strong, vibrant and resilient. They're compassionate and they are creative. We need to open up power to them and involve them so we can harness their insights and innovation to make our politics stronger and rebuild the trust the Conservatives have broken. We've heard a lot this morning about the great things our cooperative councils and co-op councillors have done together with their communities in recent years. For those of you standing for election this coming May, we're looking to you now to do even more. You are the pioneers and the trailblazers who will show this country just how transformative Labour can be when we win power, not for ourselves, but to share it with our communities. And after the sleaze, corruption and failure of the Tory years and the trust that they've broken, it's our cooperative values and our commitment to community power that can offer our people the hope of a fairer future. And that's what we're talking about today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's always great to hear from you, and thanks for continuing to put pressure on the government, who have so badly mistreated local government for over a decade now. So thank you for continuing that pressure, and thank you for always championing Labour and cooperative councillors who are working hard to counteract some of these terrible cuts. Steve, we have a few questions that have come in for you. In fact, we've had lots of wonderful questions come in. I'm going to select a few of them. The first one, Alison has sent in a question. This is a question probably pertinent to many people, but women probably in particular. She says, I want to stand for local council in my area, but politics feels so angry at the moment. Is it still worth getting involved?
Well, I mean, you're not going to hear me ever say it's not worth getting involved, because the only way that you can change politics to make it more the way it should be is to get in there. But I do agree with you. The level of anger and abuse, particularly online, speak to anyone who's elected and they all will have experienced it in some way. But I think that the really reassuring thing is the vast majority of people in politics, the vast majority of the people that we represent, are decent and considerate and kind. And what we need to do is allow our roles to help them amplify their voices, rather than those people who can get very, very shouty, particularly in online forums, to dominate the discourse. I do think we need to look at how we can change the culture of politics. I think the Yahoo style of it too often puts people off, and very often our role as elected councillors or MPs is to find ways to bring opposing views in the community together and broker the building of consensus. And I don't think we give enough. We don't highlight that enough. It's an important part of our job, and we need people with those skill sets. If we're going to work as we should to the common good, that means listening to and respecting views on different sides. And we need more people like you, Alison, from your question. I'm sure that's what you would want to see. So please don't be discouraged. Please get involved. And I think it's parties like our Co-op party that can lead the way in making that change.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, Steve. And I think if I may be slightly cheeky, I'm also going to plug Labour Women's Network training at this point, who offer some fantastic training, to have offered to more than half the shadow cabinet, actually. So do have a look at that training as well as you think about standing for local government. Another question for you, Steve. Let's see. Could you speak a bit more about about the plans to devolve more power to councils? Will it go beyond town halls and into communities?
Yes, well, it's I I can tell you what I think. I can't tell you what's going to come out of Gordon Brown's commission because they haven't published their reports yet. But it's a very positive sign indeed that Keir asked Gordon to lead this commission. It's called the Commission on the Future of the United Kingdom, and it's looking at the broke across a different might look like. Now, I think it's important, and I've said this to Gordon, and I believe he's looking at it this way, that devolution, so shifting power from Whitehall to the regions, is kind of stage one of this process. But devolution can't just be about shifting power from one set of politicians to another at a time when trust in politics and politicians is broken, a process actually that's got far worse under this current Conservative government. We have to have models of localism and direct empowerment as part of that new settlement, the new constitutional and political settlement that we're looking for. And by empowerment, I mean looking at how we give workers a bigger voice in the workplace so that they have more control over their own terms and conditions and can ensure that they can take a fairer share of the profit or the value that their work is generating. I think it means that's in the workplace. I think in neighbourhoods, we need to find ways to give people more control over the decisions that affect what they see on their doorsteps, their local park, planning decisions about their local community. I mentioned in my speech Sharon Taylor's work in establishing cooperative neighbourhoods in Stevenage. There's things that we can learn from that. And while the Tories over planning are seeking to empower landowners and developers and gag the voices of local communities, we need to be developing a different approach that seeks to give communities a bigger say in finding better ways to build the housing that we need, that is more in keeping with the needs of their own locality. And the final point there would be to give people a bigger say over the public services that they use. A lot of people at this conference will be very aware of co-production, models of co-production, taking decisions together. I think we need to find ways to level the power dynamic between those of us who are involved in taking decisions about public services and people who are using them, so that the voice of the user can influence the way that those public services are provided in the future. So workplace, neighbourhoods and communities and public services, we need direct empowerment of citizens over all of those as part of a new settlement. But I genuinely believe the co-op councils, co-op councillors, the Co-op Councils Network are doing some great work on that.
Absolutely, and I think to add to your point there, the community engagement and consultation, we're seeing Labour and cooperative councils doing some really good progressive work on really bringing their citizens into decision making, from everything, like you said, to the services that they're using, to plan making and place making, which is wonderful. One last question for you, Steve. My community, this is from Anonymous, my community came together during the crisis, but it feels like we're back to business as usual. How do we keep the community spirit alive? That's a tough one.
Well, it's such an important one, though, isn't it? Because, you know, we all saw it was so dark, wasn't it? The last year and a half, everything that we had to go through, the way that, you know, we all had to contemplate our mortality and the mortality of our loved ones in a way that we hadn't probably for most of our lives. Such a big crisis. And yet the one bright spot in all of that for me was communities, the way that people came out on the doorsteps to applaud and thank those heroes on the front line that were keeping us all safe, the flowering of mutual aid groups in different ways right across the country. This to me was a sign of communities asserting their own power and resilience despite everything that's happened over these past 11 years under the Conservative government. And we are fools if we let that go, because in that desire for communities to assert control and voice, we start to see the shape of a new and better politics. And most excitingly of all for our party, it has at its heart all of the values of cooperation and cooperativism that we champion. So this is a cooperative moment in many senses. As we come out of the pandemic and remake our country, we have to make it around the strengths, the insights and the resources of our own communities. So the future very much is in the hands of cooperators and our party. And I genuinely believe, whilst we work towards government nationally, in many places in the country and local government, we are in power, or communities, even where we're not in power in the town halls, are already asserting their own control with different projects. We've heard many of them today. This is the light that shows the way for the next Labour government. And those of us on the front bench nationally are looking and learning and listening to you, because I genuinely think we have to remake politics around people if we're going to rebuild the trust that has been so badly broken by Boris Johnson and the corruption that his government represents.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. As you may have noticed, I've got a 5-year-old desperate for a Lego session. So I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you again and hand over to our chair for the next session, which is Abigail Marshall-Katang. Abigail and I sit together on the Co-op Party's NEC. She's a wonderful sister, a wonderful cooperator, and a councillor on Leeds City Council. Abigail, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to each and every one of us. Abigail Marshall-Katang is my name, an elected member representing Little London Woodhouse and the City Centre in Leeds City Council, and also an NEC rep representing the Great Yorkshire and Humberside. So thank you so much to our Community Power in Action conference today. And thank you so much, Rosa, for introducing me. Truly grateful. Right, we haven't got so much time today. Thanks, Rosa, for taking some of my time. Well, it's okay because it was well worth it. We've got 5 wonderful speakers today who would be assisting us with the topic on the session on the 12 ideas on campaigning. Rosa did say, what are we without campaigning? And that is very true about our party and our movement. I would like to use this opportunity to also say thank you to our great chair, Jim McMahon, who actually, in his opening speech, thanked all cooperative councillors across the country who continue to work tirelessly for our movement, for our values, and for our objectives. So I am just adding my voice to him to say thank you very much. So what are we doing today? What we're doing today is to just help other councillors who can build and help community power and put that power into action at a local level with very innovative ideas, campaigns, and solutions, which develop their knowledge further and give them the skills, resources, and support to help them in their local government network. So we would like to ensure that the Cooperative Party councillors are elected to the positions where they can make a real difference and to equip them with the tools to do this. So as a cooperative councillor doing lots of work in Leeds City Council, I'm proud to let you know, as the food champion on behalf of the Cooperative Council Party, to the Leeds City Council, we are the first council in the city to launch our low carbon food pledges. So please go onto our Leeds City Council website to find out about what we're doing. And this is all down to our campaigns in the Cooperative Party fighting food justice. So straight to our speakers now. I will start with Councillor Alison Everson. Councillor Everson is an Aberdeenshire councillor, and she's president of the Convention of Council Local Authorities on being a community cooperator, and she launched the Scottish version of the 12 ideas. So Councillor Everson, if you're there with us, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abigail, and good afternoon to everybody. It's fantastic to be here with you this afternoon, launching the Scottish version of the 12 ideas for your local government manifesto for Scotland. As has been said, I'm Councillor Alison Everson. I was elected as the first Labour councillor in Aberdeenshire in 2012. And I represent a ward in Aberdeenshire known for its diversity. It includes coastal communities, traditional coastal communities shaped by links to the sea. It includes a town which expanded originally when workers came from Glasgow for employment in Aberdeen, and which has seen regular expansion since, but which suffers from a lack of a town centre. And it has rural villages and settlements of varying sizes too. Some families have been here for generations. Others have settled from overseas and from across the UK. And within these communities of place, we have too communities of interest, with people coming together with others of similar shared lived experience. Everyone, every community has experienced the storm of the pandemic, but there have been many different ships set sail in response. As councillors and candidates within the Cooperative Party, we work to make local voices heard across communities so that services are designed with and by people in their diversity and in the context of their varying needs, not for them. And the 12 ideas we have before us are a tremendous tool to help us do just that. They recognise the headline impacts of the pandemic, hidden inequalities becoming exacerbated, poverty hitting people, including many people who had never experienced poverty before, mental health challenges growing across communities, and the 12 aspects of our local government manifesto as well give a clear steer about how we can begin the work within our communities to address these impacts with the urgency that is required. By looking at building the local economy, supporting local businesses, and ensuring that the wealth created remains to support local people. By recognising that health and well-being must involve far more than the NHS, housing, lifeline transport services, community safety, sustainable energy, good local jobs. These all play a part in achieving resilient and vibrant communities in which people feel they do not just live, but in which they can thrive. And by emphasising that change must originate in and be shaped by and across the diverse communities which will benefit from it. I'm excited myself to take these 12 ideas to the group of volunteers we have working in cooperation on our manifesto in Aberdeenshire, and I hope that you will do the same. But there is more that we need to do if our manifestos are going to become the call for action that they need to be. During the pandemic, we will have all seen local groups coming together to support those shielding, to set up and run food larders, to provide lifelines for those suffering from intense loneliness and the pain of sudden bereavement. These groups worked in conjunction with council services and with the support of wider public sector partners. They were empowered with resources and with a general call to proceed to do whatever is needed locally. We learned what can be achieved when our councils and our communities are functionally and fiscally empowered. That local empowerment, which Steve Reed has also talked about, that local empowerment with the sharing of wealth and power is central to cooperative values and principles. We must work together to ensure that what has been learned in the wider political landscape is not forgotten. And our strength to do that comes from that very working together. We are individuals in our own communities. We will face challenges and we will feel that we are doing that alone. Our energies will sap as we focus on supporting communities to pursue the local causes that matter to them. But examples of best practice, the community wealth building journey of North Ayrshire, for example, can be shared between us, and hands of support reached out across the miles. Our collective experience is so valuable to local projects. So I commend the Scottish version of the 12 ideas for your local government manifesto. I ask that we work together to ensure that the empowerment needed to carry them into action is there. And I promote the support that we can give each other as we move forward in our local areas. Thank you, and all the best to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Everson. And Councillor Everson has gone on to tell us that our collective experience is very valuable and very necessary for us to be able to achieve our 12 manifesto ideas. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, Councillor Everson, and we truly appreciate it. Next on is Councillor Anthony Hunt from Tolfin County Council, and he will be speaking on the Fairfax launch wealth version of our 12 ideas. So over to you, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Abigail, and Croeso Cymru. Welcome from Wales. That's the last Welsh I'll use in this, so don't worry. I'm Anthony Hunt. I'm the leader of Torfaen Council, and I'm also the chair of the Cardiff Capital Region Joint Cabinet. I used to be the youngest council leader in Wales. I'm not anymore, but never mind. We all get old. I just wanted to say 5 things very quickly in launching the 12 ideas for Wales. The first of all is the point about the value of big ideas in local government, especially in the wake of austerity and COVID-19. And I think these 12 ideas are a great toolkit for our Labour groups going into the elections. We've got all-out elections in Wales in May. Every one of these ideas are specific, relevant and practical. And I think all 3 things are important in any manifesto pledges, any ideas that we bring forwards, especially in the wake of the growing levels of cynicism around politics. These are real ideas that can make a real difference and can be practically implemented by Labour groups and Labour councils up and down the country. I think those ideas are also built on the lessons that we've learned across the past 18 months. Steve talked very compellingly about the community resilience in the face of both austerity and of the COVID pandemic. The levels of community activity we've seen are really, a great example of cooperative values in action. That's the cooperative principle of local government as enablers, as catalysts, and not just the sort of superheroes that come in to do things to people. We do things with people. We want to empower people to go forward and to change the communities that we represent for the better. So I'm very pleased to help launch the Welsh version of these 12 ideas. I'm pleased to be speaking here from a council in Wales, partly because we've got the advantage of a great Welsh Labour government led by Mark Drakeford. They're a willing partner in so much of this work, and so many of those 12 ideas, the areas around them as well. And so that's something that we can really work in partnership with them alongside our local communities to really make a difference. I want to talk specifically today perhaps about idea number 5, about leading the fight against corporate tax avoidance. And this, for me, points to a wider set of efforts that we've got across local government to try and view value for money as something much wider than just the lowest cost of procuring a service or a product. And we want to look to environmental standards. We want to look to local supply chains and our local foundational economies. We want to look to the issue of tax justice and do work with companies that pay their fair share of tax. And many local small and medium-sized businesses pay their tax diligently, and we want to work with those grounded firms and maybe expose and not work with some of the larger firms who seem to avoid what they owe. And we want to work to drive up employment standards. And I think that's important because we're not just a direct supplier and procurer of services, we're also a key influencer within our local areas. So that's really about us as place leaders, encouraging good practice. You've seen where it's been done with the real living wage, for example, helping to as well as putting extra money into local economies to drive up this local government as a good influence. I'm glad that the Co-operative Party is part of this fight against corporate tax avoidance to stop the billions of pounds that's missing from the public purse and therefore to fund public services due to corporate tax avoidance. So I'll be keen to see as many Labour groups as Labour councils sign up as possible to the fair tax mark and to try and embed those fair tax lessons into the procurement requirements. Procurement post-austerity has become a bit of a functional service, unfortunately, at times, because it's been hollowed out in many councils who've been striving to protect frontline services like social care and education. What gets left behind in those central services that we run is very often hollowed out. And I think that's a great pity because many of the things I've talked about require real strategic focus on procurement. Procurement in terms of lowest cost is a very easy exercise to run, but procurement in terms of getting true, what I would call value for money in the wider sense, is a lot more strategic. So I think it's important that we look to strengthen our procurement functions so they can properly look at the impact of our spend, and I say our role as leaders of place as well. Lastly, I think procurement's an area of a huge number of urban myths and legends about what you can and can't do. And I think we need to be very ambitious in pushing back against some of the false myths that go around there that suggest that we can't do anything apart from look to lowest cost. It's well within our rights as councils to look to quality and to look to many of these factors, from the environment to employment standards to tax justice, in how we procure our services and the products we procure. Last of all, I just want to talk about the difference that we can make as community leaders, as councillors, and just encourage anyone thinking of standing or thinking of taking a leadership position. The value of being a councillor is immense. You can make a real difference. It is, as the slogan today suggests, it's about community power and action. This morning, I've just come back from a local park, a park that was going downhill and was a source of antisocial behaviour and environmental decay a few years ago. Working with a group of community volunteers, we've managed to get that park back up and running at the centre of the community. And there's now groups of children there playing tennis. There's groups of people helping to make the park look better, and it's well used by the local community. That's a great example of in a way, a council having to let go of being the direct provider of all the services, because we couldn't do everything, and open our arms up and trying to work with the community to work together to improve something for the better of the whole community. And so it's just one of the many examples of something that I've been able to take forward as a local councillor and a council leader, and I'd encourage anyone who wants to do the same to do it. It's not an easy job. Sometimes it's very difficult. We have to make difficult decisions, but it's a really rewarding job to work with people to make communities and to improve people's lives. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today, to launch those pledges for Wales, to commend especially Pledge 5 about the fight against corporate tax avoidance and the fair tax mark, and to look forward to working with cooperative councils across the UK to try and put our values into action.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor Hunt, and thank you very much for reminding us as community leaders, as councillors, on what part we play in our communities and the difference that we can make. Obviously, you made reference to our community resilience over the pandemic, and that's very glaring. And we have to keep hammering on that and ensuring that whilst we're campaigning, we're making sure our communities are looked after, so that it's in our deeds and not in our words. So thank you very much, Anne, for highlighting our ideas for item 5. So thank you. Next on is Emily Spurrell. So Emily is an elected local councillor for Mossley Hill Ward in Liverpool. In 2012, she became the lead member for community safety. And in 2014, she was appointed Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Merseyside in 2017, and then elected in May as Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner. It is my delight to welcome Councillor Emily Spurrell.
Thank you, Abigail, very much. Sadly, I'm not actually a councillor anymore, so I stood down as a councillor to become the Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner, but I'm really grateful actually that you've got me on the agenda, because I think when we talk about local government, we can't have to forget about police and crime commissioners and the role that we could play. And obviously there's huge amounts of great work going on as councillors. I know that as being a former Labour and Co-op councillor, but actually there is so much I think that PCCs are doing across the country so it's really great to get the opportunity to talk about some of that and highlight some of the issues where I feel like you can make a difference locally as well. So just I guess to echo what Tony was saying previously, if you are thinking about going for election, there won't be any PC elections for a couple of years now, but do think about it, because we absolutely need people at that level as much as we need you in local government as councillors and leaders and mayors as well. So I've been asked to speak to you a little bit about the specific manifesto pledge around retail workers. So this is something that I've been involved in for a few years now, from when I was involved in community safety at Liverpool City Council, because in the kind of spirit of cooperation and recognising the contribution from everybody within our society, we quite often forget about the contribution that retail workers and shop workers actually make to community safety and keeping communities safe. So things like halting the sale of alcohol, restricting the sales of fireworks. We've just had bonfire night, and actually they're a crucial, part of not selling fireworks to certain people. The sale of offensive weapons, they will refuse to sell knives to people when they're not supposed to. They're also really crucial in There's examples where they've identified somebody who might be vulnerable. So there was a scam that fraud artists were asking vulnerable people to go and buy iTunes vouchers to pay for work that was being done, and it was shop workers who were identifying these people who were being, tricked by fraudsters and being able to respond and put support in place for them. And then, of course, we've had the last couple of years where, the retail workers and our shop workers have very much been at the hub of our communities. They're the ones who've been working the whole way through this, in addition to all the health and emergency services. And so they're a really crucial part of it. So the conversation I have with the police is actually we have to see them as partners in that work, because they do a huge amount in reducing that burden and helping to contribute to the safety of our communities. But one of the sad things that we're seeing is actually, while they're trying to do that job and do that role and keep communities safe, they do face a big backlash. And we have, sadly, particularly that in the last couple of years, we've seen a big increase, especially in the amount of violence and abuse that the workers are facing, and because they're out the front line, and so they're getting these kind of this aggression, and it's very much being targeted at them. So, whether it's because you won't sell them, a bottle of vodka, or you won't sell them, the knife or whatever it is they're trying to buy, but particularly over COVID, because they were trying to enforce what was quite a new way of working around wearing a face mask and restricting access in shops and keeping your distance and, all of these issues that actually was really important in keeping people safe while we were navigating this crisis. But the fact that so many of them have seen such a huge increase in abuse and violence for simply doing their job is totally unacceptable. So I'm really pleased to be able to support this campaign and try and kind of highlight what we need to do to try and keep them safe as well. So I know you've had some of this earlier from colleagues from Usdaw, so apologies if some of this has already been repeated, but I'll just briefly run through some of the kind of quick stats just to give you an idea. So every day, more than 400 retail workers will face violence. 6 of these will involve a knife, and 2 of them might involve a gun. And obviously, we said these shops sit in the heart of our communities, and so actually it can have real impact on the wider safety of that community as well. And according to Usdaw, every minute of the working day during the pandemic, somewhere across the country, a shop worker was verbally abused, threatened with violence, or physically attacked. So this is not an uncommon issue. This is happening, a lot. And I think the scale of it can't be underestimated in terms of why we have to take action and locally really look to see what we can do to support our communities and frontline workers. I spoke to some of the staff at one of our local co-op stores a few weeks ago. And I got some feedback from them about how they've been finding it and how things have been changing. And they were saying that in some areas they've seen a 400% increase in abuse since the pandemic. They were telling me about stories of individuals who had people waiting outside after the shop had closed to be able to, approach them and harass them. And, so there's some real kind of nasty things happening. And I really want to try and make sure that we are live to the threat that these workers are facing. So I realise it all sounds very sad and depressing, and I think it's probably worth highlighting that there is some really good work being done, particularly led by some of our great co-op politicians. So there's a big campaign to try and get legislation changed. And actually, in the same way that we recognise that violence and abuse against emergency services workers, so police or ambulance workers, there is an acknowledgement that there will be an additional sentence if you attack them while they're doing their job. We want those same protections to be in place for retail workers as well. So Scotland, brilliant Scotland, have managed to get this in place already, and so we're working quite hard to try and make sure that is done in England as well. And there's an amendment that's been put to the Police Crime and Sentencing Courts bill that's going through Parliament at the minute. So the first thing I would ask in terms of getting involved in this is please sign the petition that Co-op are putting around. Please add your voice to those calls to make the government see that this is a priority, and we need to make sure that those protections are in place for our shop workers as well. And then the other thing is around just the general campaign. We're coming up to Christmas, and there's going to be a lot of obviously people out and about shopping. Tension is going to be quite high. People will be looking to probably try and make up for maybe Christmas last year that didn't quite go according to plan. We know that there's going to be a lot of retail workers out there doing their best to, make it as smooth and safe as possible. So I would just ask that you kind of be supportive to them and support the calls for the to Shop Kind, lots of Shop Kind campaigns going on, and we've just had Respect Week that's ending tomorrow, and you know, Usdaw and Co-op and others are calling on people to respect, you know, shop workers, treat them with respect when they're just doing their job, which you would expect from any other employment that people might be doing. So there's lots of work you can do locally. Get motions through your council if you're a councillor, talk to your local police and crime commissioner, see if they're doing any work around it, make sure it's in their police and crime plan, and just if we keep talking about it and keep putting the pressure on, I'm hopeful that we can try and recognise the role they play and give them the appropriate support. So thank you very much for having me, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Emily, for sharing with us, and thank you for letting us know the work you do, especially around community safety, and really, really important at this time. And like you highlighted, you know, especially during the pandemic, we've seen violence increase, and our shop, you know, workers should not be facing what they currently face at this moment in time. It's just totally unacceptable. So like you said as well, there are lots of campaigns going, you know, across different cities, and as cooperative councillors, it is our responsibility to make sure we're supporting those. We've seen from violence against women, we've seen what happened, you know, we've seen the campaign with one of our NEC members, you know, in terms of misogyny and all this going on, and we have to continue to make our voices heard and make sure we bring a stop to that. I know for Leeds, October was hate crime month, where our 3 words for that is stop it, challenge it, and report it. So we continue to ensure and advise people, any hate, any crime, any abuse must and should be reported to the authorities so that we can fight for the necessary outcomes that we need to see. So thank you very much, Emily, and we will come to you at the end with questions. They've come in already. So moving on now is Councillor Joe Fagan. So Councillor Fagan is a South Lanarkshire Council, he's a councillor with South Lanarkshire Council on tackling transport inequality with the People's Bus and Train. So Councillor Fagan, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Abigail. And I suppose I've been asked to speak about some of our experiences with transport, share some of our experiences here in sort of Greater Glasgow and Strathclyde area, and why we believe that changing how markets work will, and changing where power lies, can help us improve services for passengers, but also help create some of those resilient communities that other speakers had spoken about. I'm one of 11 Labour group leaders in the west of Scotland who have pledged ahead of next year's council elections that we will cooperate and seek to reassert public control over the bus network in the Strathclyde area. And to help people who are not familiar with the area understand that, there are no metro mayors in Scotland. There are no combined authorities in Scotland. There's no Andy Burnham or Tracy Brabin leading and fronting a campaign for London-style seamless integrated transport. There's not that focal point, so it's really falling to the 11, 12 local authorities in Strathclyde. They have to decide what their priorities are and how they will cooperate to achieve change. The other challenge that we have is that our public transport legislation in Scotland was for years the weakest in the UK, and it's only recently been strengthened thanks to amendments from Labour and cooperative MSPs like Colin Smith. We're now in a place where there's a new Transport Act on the statute book. It lifts the ban on municipal bus ownership, and it also creates bus franchising powers similar to what now exists for some local authorities in England. Could go further, but either way, the legislation has changed, and I think now the challenge comes to progressive councillors, to cooperative councillors, to progressive councils to assess how we use those powers to deliver change for passengers. In Scotland, the picture is, in terms of public transport, is quite similar to most regional bus markets outside of London. We see bus passenger numbers now at record low. a record low. There's 62 million vehicle kilometres have been stripped out of the bus network in Scotland since 2007, and subsidised routes now account for a greater share of what's left. The picture, and throughout all that period of decline, fares continue to rise. The decline hasn't been as pronounced in everywhere. There are some areas where bus services are bucking the trend, and if we take Lothian buses, for example, it records some of the best passenger satisfaction levels in the country. Faces very similar challenges, but records some of the best passenger satisfaction levels in the country, and actually achieve some of the best outcomes. Why is that? Well, I would argue it's because Lothian buses, unlike other bus services in Scotland, never left public hands. It is still a council-owned bus service. Our ambition, therefore, is that in the Strathclyde area, where, as I say, the Greater Glasgow area and its surrounding local authorities, we believe that if the councils cooperating next year, councils that have a commitment to democratic control of bus services in their manifestos, cooperate next year, we can create the biggest publicly controlled or democratically controlled bus network in Scotland, and I think probably the biggest in the UK outside of London and Greater Manchester. One of the interesting aspects of why is public transport failing, why are bus services in such terminal decline? It's interesting that we put so much money into the system and we don't necessarily get the outcomes. And I don't think the leap from a different model from where we are now is necessarily all that great. 45% of bus operators' income comes not from passengers in their fares, but comes in different forms from the state here in Scotland, and that's similar to elsewhere in the UK. It would come from concessionary fares, it would come from bus service operators grant, or it would come from those subsidies that local authorities are having to put into the network to save services. And a couple of years ago, I went to speak with Liberty Bus, which was the bus service in the island of Jersey. And Jersey at that time had taken back control of their bus network. They'd conducted a franchising exercise. Hackney Community Transport, a kind of social enterprise, had actually won the bid for the franchise at that point. And it dramatically improved the bus service in Jersey. It allowed the states of Jersey to decide, on fare structures and routes. And when I asked them how much money they were receiving in the way of support from the states, it came to about the same figure. It was about 45% of their income. And I just thought it was interesting that the state was making a similar contribution, very similar, almost identical contribution to those bus services, yet was able to dictate what those outcomes would be, was able to drive change effectively by creating a regulated market where one hadn't previously existed. And I think we've got the opportunity to maybe go further and look at how we create a system where we can take back control of the network, create the space for municipal bus companies, and actually create an environment in which we have more opportunities to encourage and develop community transport at a grassroots level. That to me is the real prize, and that to me is what we have to achieve with these new bus laws that have been created here in Scotland. There was a study released by Professor Philip Alston, who was a UN human rights rapporteur, and he describes 35 years of deregulation as a masterclass in how not to run essential bus services or essential public services. The report will be available online, and it might be possible to share that after the event. And it's just interesting. His argument, and the argument of it was a New York University report, is that deregulation isn't just a failed policy, it is an affront to human rights, because it is preventing people accessing opportunities to work and to learn, to access skills, to get to job centres, to really is undermining the social fabric of our communities. And so the case for action to address transport inequality is that pressing. Glasgow recently hosted the COP26 summit, and there was a lot of rhetoric about climate change. There was a lot of self-congratulation about climate change from world leaders here in Scotland and Boris Johnson and elsewhere. But the honest truth is that what we see just now is a situation where car travel is returning to pre-pandemic levels, and we aren't seeing that in transport. If anything, the pressure is greater in transport on bus services and rail services. Rail services actually, we're looking in Scotland at cuts to about 300 services per day. It just seems to be that a lot of the climate ambitions of that COP summit are not going to be realised. You cannot seriously say you are going to tackle climate change if you have a country where bus patronage is at a record low. So we have to change. There is a social case and there is an environmental case for changing the way this system works. And the other, I suppose, hypocrisy that comes from COP is that the delegates that were attending the COP summit in Glasgow, the world leaders, the dignitaries, and the rest of them, were all able to get around Glasgow using a smart integrated ticket. And smart integrated ticketing might be common in London, it might be common in many places across Europe, but actually in many of our communities across the UK, smart integrated ticketing is not happening because the state isn't able to intervene and isn't able to force the cooperation between operators. So COP, in a way, rather than highlighting the progress we had made, was highlighting, for me, a lot of the hypocrisy that there is around climate. And with transport being our biggest source of emissions in Scotland, it made clear to me that there's a pressing case for change. The other big development in Scotland, I suppose, is that ScotRail, our rail operator, will be coming into public hands next year. And that is not necessarily because it was a great ambition of government. It was something government was forced to do just because of how the franchise was failing and the contract was failing to meet the ambitions that were set. We cannot miss this opportunity to give passengers and workers a voice in the governance of the new operator, and we cannot miss this opportunity to align the objectives of the new rail operator, the new publicly controlled rail operator, with the rest of the public transport network. And that's where cooperative councillors and Labour and cooperative councillors can be making a difference and enforcing that integration that can make smart ticketing, for example, something that we've been promised for years, a reality, and help us address the other issues that we see in transport, reverse the decline in public transport and address affordability. The message, I suppose, that I would ask people to take away is very simple. As I say, we want to shift where power lies, and we want to not just see a shift from public to private, but also a shift towards the democratic sphere of government, where local government exists, and where I think we are in a much better position to then empower our communities. The message that I would ask people to take away from this conference, the message I would ask you to take into your manifestos, is very simple. If you empower local government in this area, if you empower local government to intervene in that market, and you can create not just better bus services, but a better public transport network that genuinely does work in the interests of passengers and not for profit. That's the extent of my contribution today, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak and share our experiences.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fagan. Thank you so much for that. We truly appreciate it. I'm going to run straight into, we've got some questions specific for you as well, Councillor. So if you can still just stay back for us, I'll truly appreciate it so that you could help answer at the end of this session. I'm going to go straight now to call on Councillor Cam Rye. So Councillor Rye is the Redbridge councillor for Goodmayes Ward on Redbridge Council, and he's been the councillor since 2014. That year, Labour finally won a majority administration in Redbridge since its inception. He's also the cabinet member for Finance, Leisure and Culture and deputy leader for Redbridge Council and works in the financial services. So welcome, Councillor Cam Rye, and over to you now.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you for having me today. As you said, I'm the deputy leader of Redbridge Council, and we took over in 2014 from the Tories after they'd had the council for 50 years. So we had a lot of work to do. I'm going to talk just briefly today on, I'll speak about our work on, who are we talking about? Sorry, our work on modern slavery and also on housing in terms of the 12 pledges. So in our council, we've already taken a lot of work on modern slavery in terms of our procurement process, the council standards on contracts in terms of the provision for modern slavery, including the ability to terminate contracts where we find convictions or where there are breaches. And that meant that for us, it felt odd that we hadn't actually adopted the co-op party motion, which we're going to do next week, and take the next steps in tackling modern slavery and build the remainder of the recommendations into our manifesto for our forthcoming elections in 2022. The other part of modern slavery for us has been addressing prostitution, because our experience has been that in our borough, it involved trafficked and coerced women, especially an issue in one part of our borough. So our work has been based on a working group that our own councils put together, which was Roots Out of Prostitution. And it meant that we were focusing not on the women, which is what a lot of our residents wanted us to do initially, and about educating our residents that actually our focus needed to be on the people that were coercing and controlling the women. And it has meant putting in public space protection orders, working with our residents who've been out on the streets with our officers and with the police, and having a multi-agency work with the Westminster Drug Programme, the Homeless Project, which has meant helping women out of prostitution and starting to see improvements in our area. And largely this has been down to working with the local communities and changing the mindset, because they've been hand in glove in our decision making and our delivery. This work has meant that over the last 3 years, where we used to see 30 to 40 women out per night, that's come down to 5. And importantly, the most important part has been changing that community mindset that we don't vilify the women, but it's actually the men who are buying the sex and actually the men who are controlling the women that we need to focus on and prosecute. So moving on to housing, we set ourselves an ambitious target to deliver 600 social homes. But additionally, we're working with our community through our citizen group on community land trust properties. You'll all understand the challenges in London with space and cost. But alongside the 35% minimum affordable target that our own developments have committed to, we've also committed to 250 community land trust properties over a 5-year period. And how we're going to deliver that is through our own development. So we have a program to build 5 community hubs, essentially libraries, council services, medical services, community space, all under one roof, alongside significant housing. The minimum affordable mix will include community land trusts and alongside our commitment to social housing. So building it within the general fund, either in the company structure or directly, allows us the flexibility to deliver these homes and ensure a social mix in the homes, with private rented and sold properties helping to subsidise the CLTs and social housing. It's proving difficult. We've all seen the increase in build costs over the last 12 months, which have moved by 20 to 25%, but our business case is holding firm and allows us to deliver on these projects. Additionally, for our manifesto, as part of the housing pledges that we're speaking about today, our aim is to take our private sector landlord licensing scheme to the next stage. It currently covers 2/3 of our borough, but we want that to be 100%, and will apply to the Secretary of State to extend it. It has raised standards. It's raised standards in their housing. It's raised standards for our tenants, and it's allowed us as a local authority to have quicker access to landlords, as we know who they are now. The discussion for us now is how we can help collectively organise a private tenants association to further improve the standards, and how we can use the housing department to leverage their strength with landlords and letting agents. But the most interesting part for us will be how we can put together a private tenant and landlord cooperative, and how that would work and deliver better housing and better housing outcomes for our tenants. And one final thing I'd like to share really is our work with rough sleepers. It's an issue everywhere, we all know that, but we have the added complexity in Redbridge that we have many of our rough sleepers who are classified as having no recourse to public funds. Having people die on our streets was one of the worst failures when we had taken over from the Tories 7 years ago. we decided that we were going to find a way that we could help each and every one of them, at least give that opportunity to them. So we opened an older council building, the Rydale Centre, on a long-term supported housing scheme for high needs rough sleepers, and further redeveloped that in the spring of this year to provide another 18 studios with on-site support. We've also put aside funding, and we can do this as councils, to have 22 supported studios for those with medium-term support needs. So effectively, they're in for a short term or a short to medium term, and then through that support are out, and then we can help other people as well. But the issue we had with no recourse to public funds meant we had to find an innovative way of getting around some of those rules. And so what we did was put together a project and a joint venture with the Salvation Army at the council and local volunteers. It's cost us £5 million, but it's meant that we put together a 42 self-contained building with self-contained flats in there, which function as a temporary accommodation unit with an integrated social enterprise for repairs and learning skills for our rough sleepers. The Salvation Army and the local volunteers will be on site and are on site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to offer welfare support to the homeless individuals living there. And it means that this has allowed us to overcome some of the rules around helping those who are no recourse to public funds, because the Salvation Army are the ones and volunteers who manage to support those people on a day-to-day basis. The positive outcomes just over the last 2 years have been that we have managed to get 66 people into private rented accommodation. Another 41 have been reconnected to their home areas and families, including internationally. Another 87 have been assisted into supported housing schemes. And we've got 3 individuals with complex needs. And another 20 are being helped to regularize their immigration status so they can have access to resources. It shows we can make a huge difference as cooperative councillors. And each of those numbers is a real person who've seen their lives change. And our next and final stage really on this is to develop a strategy that we want to use to lobby government ministers and obviously our own shadow ministers on how we can help people off the streets permanently. And that includes those that have no recourse to public funds. If they fund us properly and use our work as a model, ultimately be something that we can actually prove will cost less financially and socially than the status quo. Thank you for listening to me and allowing me to speak today, Abigail.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rai. And just listening to how you have tackled those without recourse to public funds, especially on homelessness, is really, really exemplary. So I definitely will be speaking to you after this regarding that, to be able to see how we can tap from your experience. So a very big thank you to all our panelists. Please, could we have all of them on the screen? And what I will do is quickly read out the questions that have come through. So instead of taking them one at a time, I'll read out all the questions. And if whichever you feel strongest to answer, please feel free to come in and answer them. Now, the first question is from Ben. Do the panel think that our cooperative policies gives us a good competitive advantage in elections? Well, first of all, I will say a big yes as a cooperative councillor myself, but I will let the panelists help you with that. Another question, it was super inspiring to see so many cooperative councillors speaking out at COP26. What more can councillors do to fight climate change in their area? Another question, tax avoidance also makes it harder for our high street shops to compete. What else can councillors do to help high streets that are facing competition? Another question, as a local councillor, what can I do to help me engage my Tory PPC on retail violence? Definitely that's for you, Emily. And the last one is from Janet. I see the 12 ideas co-op solutions to the crisis in social care. How can we make a difference in procuring this type of service? We did actually have a social care speaker, but unfortunately was not able to make it. So open to yourselves now, panelists.
Do you want me to start with the retail one? Yeah. And I'll let colleagues address the others because they'll be in a better place than I am. Yeah, so it's a good question. And obviously, there are lots of areas which are represented by Conservative PCCs these days. I think the way you talk to them is actually we're all facing very similar challenges around demand on policing. So obviously there's a moral argument around keeping your community safe, and we know that this is an issue and it's something that we have to tackle. So at the very fundamental part, you would hope that people would acknowledge that there are, you know, people in their community who might be suffering and not getting the right support. So that's the first thing. But from a very practical point of view, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of the beginning of my presentation, they play a really important role in reducing that demand on police, in terms of offering a frontline defence for reducing antisocial behaviour, particularly during, you know, bonfire periods, or, you know, reducing the sale of alcohol. All of these issues that we know put pressure on policing. If you support and if you back up the frontline retail workers, actually you'll probably get the benefits back, you know, tenfold, because they can then be embedded in the community. And things like, you know, getting CCTV from the shops and things that are not all of them will have, but some of the bigger ones will. You know, if they have those networks, they can feed that into the police, and ultimately it will reduce the demand, make the police's job easier, which means that then they have more capacity to look at other issues. So, you know, it's very much the spirit of cooperation in terms of what we're arguing for today. But I just think that from a Tory point of view, you know, when they're looking at the budget and they're looking at demand on policing and where they're trying to send all of their officers, if you present it as actually this could reduce demand on policing, that for me is a really strong argument for all PCCs to support it.
Thank you very much. Who would like to take the next question? Yes, Alison.
Yeah, I'll come in here. I think the question about what can we do to get change, I think an awful lot of the speakers here have got something in common in what we've talked about today. Talked about partnership and working with other people, working with people across our communities, working with people in other political parties where that's what's necessary to do to get that change locally when you're in opposition, for example, and collaborating across the public sector as well and with the third sector. And I think that partnership world is something that as cooperatives, you know, it comes naturally to us, and it's something that we maybe need to spread to others as well and encourage people to work together for the right outcomes. The other word that's become very obvious today as being really important is empowerment. When people are empowered, they feel more willing to participate themselves because they feel they're going to get something. You know, the project they've been dreaming of locally is more likely to happen. And I think we need to work together to make sure that the empowerment that we have seen recently, because people have had the finance given them to support particular projects recently, and they've had the push to do it as well. We seriously need to make sure that that empowerment continues moving forward, because the change we are seeking will only happen with those two things: people being empowered and people working in partnership. And that comes naturally to us with our values and our principles. You know, we can be the beacons to encourage other people to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. Anthony.
Yeah, in response to Ben's question, do the 12 ideas of the co-op policy give us a competitive advantage? I think they do, because people are increasingly tired of politicians who promise they can fix everything in and of themselves. Whereas if you promise to work with communities to try and turn around problems, I think that opens the door. People listen more. On climate change, we can do so much locally, both by our example as large institutions in ourselves, in what we do, to become less dependent on fossil fuels and to decarbonise our operation, and the leadership we can provide to the local community. So I think if you link it to local community action, you can get people involved in a way that you can't if it's just a global concept. On tax avoidance and high street shops, I think we can do so much to help boost our local high streets. And we're looking at a number of innovative steps to try and get into our high streets to help those fight back against maybe offshore online retailers who aren't paying the same tax that maybe local shops do. The more we can do in that respect, the better, as well as how we procure ourselves. And social care, I think we could take up the whole rest of the day on that. If Joe was rightly saying that bus deregulation was an advert in how not to do things, social care and the fragmentation of that sector is another one, and how we can procure that better, how central government could give us the space to procure that better in a true best value way, as opposed to lowest cost, and to give people the care that they deserve and that we'd all want in our older age, or those who've got disabilities. I think that's a huge conversation that we need to have and that we need to lead on from local government.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'll give Jill 30 seconds, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I just want to maybe pick up the question about high streets and link that, I suppose, to the question about COP. And my observation is we actually have a role in shaping what the post-COVID norms are and what the post-COVID economy is going to be. It feels as if there is just in some parts of the economy, just a return to a kind of default setting. It doesn't have to be that way. And actually having, for example, looking at what those work patterns might be and having local leaders shaping what those patterns might be, that's a way of directing people towards our town centres and to make better use of town centre spaces. And I think that really where we could contribute something is by shifting more resources into place-based investment strategies and unlocking sources of finance that we've not traditionally been very good at unlocking. And I'm thinking about pension funds, for example. Strathclyde pension funds, one of the biggest in the country. That's one we could certainly get more out of. And I think a lot of talk of empowerment for understandable reasons, and I'm conscious a lot of my contribution was about big national and regional operators, but we can actually get state power and community power pulling in the same direction on this and reinforcing each other. And I think that creates a more sustainable local economy that's going to emit less and deliver more in the way of community well-being.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sorry, we can't take more questions now. We've got to bring this to a wrap, but I just want to use this opportunity to say thank you so much to all our panelists. Thank you for all the 12 ideas that you have been able to elaborate more on. And I will encourage people who are watching and councillors who are restanding or standing for the first time to please go onto our website, which is the Co-op website, and / our 12 ideas, and you can see further and more information on there. I will now close by calling on our lovely Emma Hodinett, who is the Co-op Party Assistant General Secretary for Representation and Political Matters. So over to you, Emma. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abigail. That was an absolutely great session. And as we hurtle towards lunchtime, in this last slot, we're going to look at community power in action. And without further ado, I want to introduce our key speaker on this, which is Donna Hall. Really pleased that she can join us today. She is chair of the new local think tank, but you may also recognise her as a former chief exec of Wigan Council, where she brought in the infamous Wigan deal, which was about a new social contract between the council and the community. And I think a real grounding in terms of our ideas around community power in action. But I don't want to steal your thunder, Donna. I'm going to hand over to you.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Emma, and hi, everybody. It seems like a really brilliant event. I think it's fantastic that you're doing it, and community power does seem to be growing in traction in all, actually, even in the Conservative Party at the moment. So, but I do think it is the Cooperative Party's natural territory, community power. I think it's essential that we do start to think of different ways of delivering services. But I think for me, lots of us talk about it, fewer actually do it, fewer turn it into practice. And, you know, everyone's read Hilary Cotham's book, Radical Help. If you haven't read it, then I really would recommend you to have a look at it. And basically she describes 4 experiments that she tried, and one of them was in Wigan. And it was that experiment that actually gave us the idea to think differently about how we worked with citizens, and the Wigan deal kind of came from that. But rather than it just being a project, because I think very often people think community power, it's an interesting engagement project, or maybe even a civic pride project, or a public relations. Some people even think it's a kind of PR exercise. It's far from that. It's not a project. It's a complete mindset shift in the way that you engage and the way that you work with citizens, making sure they're at the heart of decision making, making sure they're at the heart of redesigning services, but also that the whole basis of trust in the way that we work with the community and voluntary sector and neighbourhood networks. So it's not big society. That's another thing I wanted to say. I don't even know what big society was, being honest, but it's not a way of getting rid of jobs and putting them into voluntary roles where people don't get paid a decent wage. That's absolutely not what community power is. I do think it's characterised by some on the left as being like that, and I think that's wrong. I mean, my main bug, I'll tell you a little bit about Wigan in a bit, but my main bugbear is that we don't work together on community power, and that we have almost like factions fighting against each other. So you've got community wealth building fighting community power. How crazy is that? Reminds me of the life of Brian, you know, the People's whatever they were called, Judean Popular People's Front versus the Popular People's Front of Judea. We really do have to work together, because you know, people who are not in favour of listening to people and putting communities in the driving seat and really shifting power to local people are, you know, they're working together in the interests of capital and in the interests of maintaining status quo. So it's really important that we do create a social movement and work together. And I think the Co-operative Party should be right at the centre of that. There is also a fantastic growing social movement that is from communities themselves, rather than it being from people like me who run think tanks and hospitals and councils. And it's by somebody called Will Brett, and it's called We're Right Here. So I would really encourage you to follow them on Twitter and look at what they're about to launch in the next couple of weeks. I think it's really, really exciting, and it would be brilliant for cooperative party members to form alliances with them if you can. So a little bit about Wigan before I move on to New Local. So 10 years ago, we'd started some work with Hilary Cottam in a place called Worsley Mains in Wigan, and we asked Hilary to work across the public sector, so not just the council but the police, DWP, housing and the NHS, to think differently about how we could work with 25 families whose children were on the edge of being taken into children's social care. And very often this kind of went back generations of families in real crisis who needed better support than we were able to provide. And what we found, this is back in 2010-11, was that we were processing the families through an increasingly fragmented system, and we were spending 80% of our time on continually assessing them and referring them to different bits of the system, whether it was mental health, drug and alcohol services, housing services. And the cost on average was around £250,000 per family per year. This will be familiar to you, those of you that are actually involved in local government. So we realised this was an issue with the way that we organised ourselves around individuals, communities and families. There were 22 social workers on some streets in Wigan not working together to try to build and encourage the building of neighbourhood networks and social connection between families who needed support, but basically just doing things to people, not doing things with people, and having this very kind of clipboard type mentality that you had to be bad enough to access services, otherwise you were told to go away, get worse, and then when you get bad enough you can come back and you will meet the threshold then for accessing our services, and then you can have all the things we think you want rather than what you actually do want. So this was a real kind of eye-opener for all of us at the time. We had social workers in tears and housing officers looking back over 10 years of everyone trying their best to support people, but the efforts were not working. So we shifted the way that we worked with families and tried to focus on 80% of our time on building a different relationship with them, and trying to build on the assets and the strengths that they have, and tried to create, you know, a kind of support structure for them, which wasn't based on professional interventions, but based on neighbourhood support. At the same time, we were doing something with a group called Nesta with older people in a place called Scholes in Wigan. And again, we learned very similar lessons there. We were, in terms of adult social care, we were spending a huge amount on what we thought people wanted. When we actually asked them, are you happy in a day centre, being picked up in the morning in a council minibus and being dropped off again? And the answer was no, we're not. We're with people we don't like or people we don't know, and we want something different. We want to do something that we really enjoy. So this, coupled with the fact that we had no money, we had to make around £160 million worth of savings over an 8-year period. We were number 3 on the most cut councils in England at that point in time. We knew we had to do something radically different when we wanted to redesign the relationship with citizens. We also realised, and the political leadership at the time realised, that austerity was going to impact on our citizens. So the answer was not to increase council tax year on year, as many organisations do. We decided to freeze it for 8 years. So that made a real difference to families. It actually gave an extra £500 per family per year in a Band D property. So that's quite a significant amount of money. And that was a political priority to protect people from the worst effects of austerity in Wigan. At the same time, we wanted to invest in the community and voluntary sector and to try to create a broader range of services, particularly for people who wanted to access adult social care, but also people who were on the edge of children's social care and generally the wider population. So we put 13 million into something called a community investment fund, which wasn't a top-down commissioned set of services where we thought this is what people want and need. It was bottom-up, based on listening to people and asking what they wanted, whether it was to help them with their mental health, young people, to support them to be physically active and not socially isolated and lonely, whether it was for a trans support group, whether it was a music project or something called Rugby Memories, which was not a stigmatised dementia support project, but it was to try to build on some of the cultural and sporting history of the borough, so people could meet the old players and the new players, bring the programmes and talk about things that really mattered to them. We transferred a lot of assets to the community with support and a budget. So a farm was transferred to a drug and alcohol recovery project. We transferred swimming pools, libraries, lots of other services, but the people that were working in those facilities were paid the living wage. I think that's really important. It's not big society, this. So a fundamental shift. We also had integrated place-based teams, 7 integrated place-based teams with people working without their lanyards, from the police, from housing, from primary care networks, even from the acute trust, based within those integrated place-based teams, working around the family, working around the person, a little bit like troubled families. We called it confident families in Wigan, but it was, and we had something written on the wall of one of them that said, don't do anything if it doesn't help the person, because of the emphasis previously on just processing people. We focused a lot on attitude and behaviour of all of our staff. So we had 5,000 staff and also then spread that into the NHS as well. So altogether around 12,000 public servants working in Wigan. Many of them lived in the borough, but really tried to focus on thinking differently about citizens and really being a public servant, serving the public rather than processing the public, and unleashing the community power that is there. We didn't call it social prescribing. I have a problem with that because it implies that the GP knows what you need. Very much kind of self-prescribing based on something called the community book, where you type in your postcode and you can see what community activity is around you, and you can access it with support if you need that support. So new local, we did lots in Wigan. It really was amazing, and it's still going on. That's the thing, the beauty of it. Very often when you get a new chief exec or a new political leader, you get a new strategy and it shifts. But the deal was very much a strategy for place, which will outlive any political or managerial leader who happens to be there. So a little bit about, sorry, if you are interested in finding out more about the deal, the King's Fund have written something which is quite useful, and they've got some little videos to accompany it. It's called Lessons from the Wigan Deal. There's lots of stuff there to learn, and it wasn't perfect. I'll be the first to say it was work in progress. I think what was good about it was really clear on purpose. What are we here to do? We're here to enable, not to do things to people. And the King's Fund said it was, secondly, as well as clarity of purpose, it was constancy of purpose. We stuck with it. It wasn't a project or a programme. And when the money ran out, we didn't just step back and start to go back to what we always used to do. It was a fundamental shift in mindset and power. It was our corporate strategy. It was our budget strategy. It was everything. It was at the heart of everything that we did. And the main value, we had 3 main values for everyone who tried to make it happen. The main value for us was courage, because this is not just something that you can layer on top of broken public services. This is a fundamental rewiring of every single aspect of local government and the NHS in a place. It takes really courageous leadership, political and managerial, and it's not for the faint-hearted, but it does work. So as well as making the savings, we were voted the best council to work for by our staff. They really loved working in this different way. It kind of reconnected them with why they wanted to become a public servant in the first place, which was to help people, which sometimes we kind of forget with the way that we've become quite fractured and we don't work together. And we also managed to add an additional 7 years of healthy life expectancy in the areas which were the most deprived wards. Again, I don't like using the word deprived. Who wants to be described as deprived? We would call them areas of social injustice. But 7 years of healthy life expectancy additional over a 10-year period was not the council or the NHS. It was the community and voluntary sector working together. These 500 new projects, really bolstered by some additional funding and trust. We trusted the community and voluntary sector to just get on with it. We didn't micromanage them like many organisations do. In fact, some organisations spend more on the management process of a £10,000 grant than they actually give them. So it was all on the basis of trust. So New Local, if you're interested in New Local, we are a network of around 70 councils. We've been working really intently with many people who are on the call today, including Steve Reed, who's been working with our director, Dr. Adam Lent. But we're really keen to work with people. We're very much a partnership orientated think tank, and we're not interested in just writing glossy research reports. We want to turn community power into action on the ground. So thanks very much, Emma, and thanks for listening. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much, Donna. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts, a different perspective for us as well. And if people have not looked at the New Local website, there are tons of resources on there about community power. It's absolutely brilliant. I guess one quick question before we move on to a discussion with our panelists about community power. Where do you start? You talked about this whole cultural shift within the council. You know, it can sound a bit daunting. You know, if people are interested in this, where would you start?
I think a good place to start is with the budget. People will be setting their budgets now, and I think just, you know, whatever you do, if you can identify any resources that you could think differently about, a bottom-up community pot. Many of you will have disparate pots across different departments, or even the clinical commissioning group will have pots, and other organisations, housing associations and others working in the patch. Try to get people to come together, and if you can increase the size of that pot, a penny spent in the community and voluntary sector, I think, brings back absolutely loads of you know, commitment, buy-in, and I think, you know, we do need to recraft the way that we work with the community and voluntary sector and stop micromanaging them. So that would be a starting point. I think secondly, when you're thinking about your corporate strategy for the following year, start to think about, you know, having that really simple stated purpose of unleashing community power. Many organisations don't have it really within their corporate plans and strategies. And also, I think you've already mentioned in your manifestos, as politicians, making sure it's there when you're going for election and when you have your Labour group meetings, you know, thinking about how you can spread it across departments and not just have it, you know, as a little project, but thinking about that mindset shift. A big part of it is organisational development as well, and thinking about how you can encourage people, every professional, to start to think in a person-centred way. It is counterintuitive to some, particularly, again, being honest, children's services. I struggled more to get buy-in from my director of children's services than anybody else, any external partner, and eventually we parted company, being honest, and, you know, somebody came in who did get it, and you know, we still got good under Ofsted. So it's not a dangerous strategy, this, to work with families in a way that builds on the community and the neighbourhood that they live in. It's It just makes perfect sense to me to do that. You know, the 22 social workers on one street scenario, it's absolutely bonkers. We can't continue like that. So those are just a few things to start you off, Emma, there.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. And it's really good to hear the example about social care, you know, that this can be applied to some of those more difficult services within the council as well. So thank you, Donna. Really appreciate your time with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to move on to our next panel to hear from some excellent leaders in local government. I have Councillor Jo Cullinan, who is the leader of North Ayrshire Council and the lead on community wealth building there. Hello, Jo. I've also got Councillor Arooj Shah, who is the leader of Oldham Council. It's great to have Arooj here, newly elected leader of Oldham Council, first Muslim woman to hold such a role in the north of England as well. And we're going to hear about some of the fantastic stuff that she's doing, in particular, some of that cultural change that she is leading from the top as well. And then last but not least, I have Antoinette Bramble, who is the Deputy Mayor of Hackney, also one of the vice chairs of the LGA Labour group as well. So without further ado, I'm going to ask all of the panelists to kind of give us a little introduction, and then if there are any questions, we'll open it up to that. So first off is Jo, if you'd like to start.
Okay, thanks, Emma, and good to see everyone on the panel this afternoon. Really interesting sort of keynote speaker there in Donna in terms of community power, and I think I recognise some of what Donna said. I think we've certainly in North Ayrshire been quickly moving away from sort of tick box consultations towards a process which is about full-on participation in decision making. And as we've done that, I don't think over the sort of last 5 or 6 years of my administration we've ever went against the views expressed by our communities. Best example of that is probably the process that we undertook with our high-rise flats after Grenfell. We made the decision that we were going to install sprinkler systems in our high-rise flats. And then we looked at the business case of that and looked at a different sort of model, which was actually demolishing those high-rise flats and replacing them with new modern council houses. We've got 2 sets of high-rise flats in North Ayrshire, one in Salkits and one in Irvine. And I was absolutely conscious that we were talking about people's homes, not just the council's housing stock. So the process that we undertook was we had a sort of direct vote of the tenants in each of those blocks. In Irvine, 2/3 of the tenants and residents voted to demolish and replace, and that's what we're processing through. But in Salkits, the exact opposite was the case, and 2/3 wanted to retain it and have the sprinklers installed and a range of other investments in the existing high-rise flat structure. So we've processed that as well, and I think that's direct sort of democracy. My first budget as well, we absolutely did set aside money for communities and actually devolve some of that down to the communities to make decisions on. In Scotland, we're very good at speaking about buzz terms and buzzwords in terms of political circles, and one of those buzzwords is participatory budgeting. The Scottish Government have set local authorities a target of distributing 1% of their revenue budgets via participatory budgeting processes. At the minute, North Ayrshire Council is the only council in Scotland that's meeting that 1% target. In fact, we are exceeding that target. And the reason we are exceeding that target is because we've moved away from just doing small grant participatory budgeting, which is the kind of basis of the Scottish Government's PB record. And we are now moving towards mainstreaming some council budgets towards PB processes such as ground maintenance. In the budget, we also created a community investment fund. That was a fund that we devolved down to our 6 locality partnerships to decide how to spend. And we're seeing some really great projects coming through that community investment fund process. We've got a group on the Isle of Cumbria, for example, who have taken ownership of the town hall and have now raised over £2 million to restore it. It's been closed for a number of years. A disused part of Salkits train station has been taken on by a local karate club, and again they have managed to raise over £600,000 to restore that into a training facility for the community. We've seen outdoor gym equipment being installed in my own community and co-winning via a community group supported by the Community Investment Fund, and it's been great to see that. The Co-op Party have obviously campaigned quite hard on the right to food as well, and we've certainly been making sure that our communities are part of any solution in terms of access to dignified food. We set up a Fairer Food Forum, brought all the community groups who are involved in food in some aspect together. And what we've now seen is that we've got 9 community food larders established over the last year, with more in development, and they're providing low-cost access to food to our communities. What I would say, though, is Donna, the last keynote speaker, did say this tension that exists between community wealth building and the concept of community power. And I think that's probably because I see community wealth building principally being about the economy. It's not about just community power and decision making and participatory democracy. It's very much about the economy and who owns it. And it's quite interesting that when we speak about the Wigan deal and the work that Donna spoke about in Wigan, that Wigan have now adopted community wealth building as their approach to the economy. So they've built on what they've done already with community power, and now adopted the economic response as well, which is community wealth building in my eyes. What we are trying to do now going forward is put the community into community wealth building. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges to date with community wealth building. I don't think you can do some of the transformation in terms of ownership of land and assets, for example, unless you've got the community there to take ownership of it, for example. You can't create cooperatives without cooperative members. You can't create worker-owned businesses without workers, so you need to make sure that you embed that within the process, and that's what we are absolutely doing in North Ayrshire. Some of the next steps that we'll take in our community wealth building journey, for example, will be exploring community land trusts, which I think will be quite exciting for us. And the other thing that we're currently working on in advance of next year is a participatory democracy strategy, and that will go well beyond what we've already done in terms of community power, participatory democracy, decision making, etc. Go well beyond that, and include stuff like how do we make sure that there's direct democratic participation in council meetings. So quite an exciting journey that we've been on in this agenda, but happy to end there, and hopefully I'll be able to stay on for some questions, but I do need to move quite sharply, unfortunately, Emma, but thanks very much.
Not a problem. Thank you very much. And we'll see if we get to questions, but it's really important to have your thoughts, and interesting that debate about community wealth building versus community power, which I hope isn't too much of a tension for you. Next up, I have Councillor Arooj Shah. Over to you, Arooj.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you so much for the invitation to talk as part of today's panel. It's a real honour and one I couldn't turn down, as cooperation and community empowerment is absolutely part of our DNA in Oldham. So I took over as leader in May this year, 10 years after Oldham became a cooperative council under Jim McMahon's leadership in 2011. But the strong legacy he left means that our cooperative ways of working that drive community empowerment are really, really well embedded. So as I say, empowering communities and working with them, and sometimes just letting them deliver, as I strongly believe a lot of the times they can do a better job than what we can, is central to everything that we do as a council here. So at the point that every decision is made, every report is written, and in every appraisal held, our team members have to say what the cooperative difference will be made through the decision that they make on their project or their activity. And it's also written in our organisational values and throughout the behaviours we expect our staff to exhibit. And those things are really, really important. They help give a strong message to staff that the people of Oldham are a part of the team, that we make decisions together and we deliver those decisions together. And we make the best use of absolutely everybody's skills, abilities and resources. And it's a reality in a way that we spend the town's money and the way we tackle some of the most challenging issues that face Oldham. So, for example, through our communities, Thriving Communities project, that's a project between the council and the NHS. We've invested over £1 million in grants to community groups to help us deal with the issues having the biggest impact locally, but also the issues that are costing public services the most locally. And I loved Donna's point earlier about sometimes we obsess well, bureaucracy is a thing, and we obsess so much about how people are delivering those services because we don't give them the trust that they deserve. And actually, that's not an effective way of working. So through this Thriving Communities programme, our Social Action Fund and our Fast Grants programme, we have funded amazing community organisations to do absolutely incredible and unbelievable things over the last few years, such as combating loneliness and isolation, tackling childhood obesity, preventing diabetes, and keeping people ultimately out of hospital, and in particular keeping people away from A&E, and we know that's a massive strain everywhere. But the money that was given through a mixture of large grants and some really fast small grants has not only made a difference to issues that we set out to tackle as an organisation, but also through the unprecedented need that grew from the pandemic. So it was really efficient way of working, and the establishment of local community clinics that were staffed by local volunteers and promoted by local organisations and word of mouth. So for other groups, we did things differently. So through direct contact from healthcare professionals, for example, but always shaped by the community based on their experiences and the diverse needs that they had. And nobody could do that more than our community organisations. I could go in a lot more detail about lots more of that work, but also we did a lot to increase public meetings, making sure that actually that everywhere we were and wherever.
Oh, hello. Have we lost Arouge there? If we have, then I'm going to ask Antoinette to pick up, if that's all right. And if we can get Arouge back, then we will do that.
Thank you, Emma, and welcome and good afternoon, conference. Really pleased to be speaking at this session. I think that over the country, we have seen that the pandemic has shown the power of communities. And if you remember that overnight, mutual aid and community hubs, neighbourhood WhatsApp groups were set up to support them in that, and many of us as elected members are in those groups and still there today. In Hackney, we supported 2,500 volunteers in that, and we established safeguarding arrangements and mechanisms to provide a network to support them in delivering that work that they are doing. These volunteers helped in our Hackney Food Justice Alliance, and they helped deliver 3,000 meals and 2,000 food parcels for those that were either isolating or shielding. I think the real test for the local cooperative council now going forward is how we harness and build on that network, that moving forward that we make sure that we build upon it and it doesn't just dissipate and fall away. When councils rolled in distributed foods finished, what we did after the first lockdown is that we worked hard with our 4 local food hubs to continue that support. And some of the things that we had to make sure that we did is as a community that some of that food was culturally specific and appropriate. So cooperative councils can take advantage of these new community networks if they enter in good partnership arrangements. So I talked a bit before about us in Hackney coordinating 2,500 volunteers to support us through the pandemic in delivering food, and we couldn't have done it without them. But those volunteers now are also some of the volunteers that are now in our vaccination centres supporting people there. So it's making sure that we build upon it. Out of those 2,500 volunteers, we have 190 that are now community champions, and they help us to ensure that we've got accurate information in a timely manner that's accessible to the community about vaccinations and other important messages. What we do as well, we continue to work with those local food hubs and charities, and what the Hackney Food Justice Alliance helps us to do is work with over 40 community groups within our local community. Hackney VCS is also part of that. They have been instrumental through the pandemic, making sure that we help and deliver and support the needs of people in our community throughout the pandemic. They are also very keen, not just because it's easy to see the world through the lens of COVID now, but actually the voluntary sector are a key part of that preventative work that we like to do within our communities, and also reach those groups that are marginalised within our community. And it's brilliant that they support in councils when council budgets that are depleting and already stretched. Our Hackney voluntary community sector has had a long, proud history of independence, campaigning, advocating for our community and reaching those that have been most marginalised. Establishing the relationship between a council and a voluntary sector, a cooperative council, is key to empowering the community and also giving your community agency. We have done that through Hackney because we've got just over a 2 million grant-based approach, but our commission section for our voluntary sector is just under £20 million for our commissioning framework. And through all of that money that the voluntary sector is able to, through commissioning, bid for, they then get to empower the community with different voluntary groups. That has meant over 400 play sessions, over 3,000 different activities for children and young people, 2,250 education sessions for young people, over 1,000 hours of employment sessions, 700 households have got advice on finance and health and well-being, and all the advice that they may have needed in that session, and hundreds of voluntary hours and lots of sessions around health and well-being. And actually, as a local authority, given that commissioning framework, empowered the community for them to reach some of the people that actually won't come through the doors of a council and for different reasons may not want to work for a council. So the last thing that I'd say as a cooperative council that you can give the community's powers is giving them a stakehold in decision making. So whether it's citizens' assemblies, citizen commissions. In Hackney, we've done something called Hackney Young Futures. And what has happened is that we got young people to lead this piece of work. They spoke to 2,500 young people. What worked in Hackney? What needs to be better? And if you were mayor for a day, what would you change? And actually, those young people, when you give young people a platform, they don't just tell you what's wrong. They come up with the solutions. They gave us 72 how we could do it and gave us 21 recommendations over a series of themes. We're working through them as we speak, and we have nearly met all of their recommendations. One of the things is that we've now employed a young apprenticeship manager to help us work through those recommendations. And two examples, they said they need to have young people on planning. So we've set up a panel where young people get to feed into what planning should look like and that framework. They also made a recommendation about having better representation on governing boards. So we have now Hackney Get Young People Governing. We've got 12 schools in a pilot. So literally overnight, we've changed the diversity because they're all young people from diverse background, and also the age of governing bodies because they are 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds. And that's nothing against those of us that are slightly older that don't fit into that bracket, but absolutely younger people in that decision making is absolutely key. So it's about putting power in the hands of people. And that's really what cooperative councils are all about. Thank you, Emma. I have to pause there. I'm really excited, but I'm conscious of time.
Thank you very much. And it's just great to hear so many examples of how you're putting this into practice. And I really like that idea about how you're devolving power. You know, that's such important that we do devolve the power and the resources to enable people to do things for themselves and to bring about that change. So thank you very much for that. We lost Arooj thanks to technology halfway through what she was telling us. So we do have Arooj who's going to have the final word. Hi, Arooj. You were rudely interrupted mid-flow. So just leave you with the final thoughts and anything else you want to share from Oldham.
Thank you, Emma. I just thought it was a polite way of telling me that you didn't like what I was saying. But no, I think I finished off talking about thriving communities and how that helped us through the administration of large and small grants to tackle issues around isolation and all the issues, I think, the ones that which local public services have really struggled to tackle for generations, but we're being dealt with by acknowledging that the people who know our communities the best are themselves, and the organisations that are embedded in those communities powered by local people are the best to deliver them. So they don't only have skills and expertise to deliver the projects and activity. I think they also had the local knowledge and the connections to shape and determine exactly what was required. But alongside that, we are also working really hard to be more inclusive in our everyday work and decision making too. And I think nothing can illustrate them better in Oldham than what we did in the work to our approach to defining COVID policy. So it was really fair to say that Oldham was hit really hard by the pandemic in health terms, but financially too. And places like Oldham, it only takes something like that to really demonstrate and just how difficult challenges are, and how our most vulnerable people suffer the most. So we found that with more vulnerable people, we found that people were infinitely more vulnerable to the effects of COVID in many ways, and our communities just stepped up in such an incredible way. They volunteered to deliver food, to collect medicines, to man vaccination centres and clinics, and to knock on doors to pass on really vital public health and advice, not just to other communities but to their neighbours. And Oldhamers were such a strong asset and the best asset that this town has, and we wanted to make sure that their voices weren't only heard in shaping our response to the pandemic, but were the defining voice. So we established community champions, and that was a network of local people to reach into our communities. They gathered intelligence, information on need, and using it to help us make decisions through what we called our Equality Action Group that we're still running and is really successful. And that also helped us build public confidence in councils, because I don't think we're unique. You know, councils aren't generally liked. And I think this group helped us really tap into some of those communities with a high percentage of residents that, I mean, I hate this term, but what people class as hard to reach. And we knew that take up in some areas of Oldham would be a challenge, but our community champions really helped us find new ways to roll out those vaccines, setting up the vaccine clinics specifically for their communities where they were needed, helped us to write and deliver public health messages, and then via those community networks and local faith groups to shape their own approaches. And that local ownership and delivery was central to the drive in vaccine take-up, which we really struggled in some of our communities. And just one example was our Bangladeshi community take-up rates. It doubled to around 75% for the first jabs in just a couple of weeks of the establishment of those local community clinics. And they were all staffed by local volunteers and promoted by local organisations and word of mouth. And for other groups, we did things differently through direct contact from healthcare professionals. So, for example, but always shaped by the community based on their experience and their diverse needs. And I could go into more detail about lots more of our work, the increase in public meetings, engagement and consultations that is driving our priorities on a daily basis. But our amazing women's task force that is bringing together a group of talented local women from all walks of life to improve other women's lives locally, and our work with local businesses to get young people in the criminal justice system into sustainable work. All those things have been shaped by local people and are being delivered with local people. We've still got tons more to do, and we don't always get everything right, but our next priority is changing the way we fund the voluntary sector within activity even more, to try and wherever we can move away from grant giving one-off pots, and I know John alluded to that earlier, to focus on more sustainable funding models based on really true valuable partnership. And we need to hold this priority and these values even when the chips are down and we're having to cut other services and projects, which will be really hard, but something we're absolutely determined to make happen in Oldham. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm sorry for getting booted off earlier, and I'm sorry I've not been able to join the full day of events, but I really am delighted to be able to come along and join you on this session.
Thank you very much, Aruj, and it's great to hear about what you're putting in training Oldham already, only a few months into the role, and how you're using those cooperative values. That's really great. And I just have to say, you probably have the best backdrop as well of the day, so thank you very much. And a big thank you to all our panel. We're going to bring this conference to a close now. A big thank you for joining us throughout the day. And I just want to give you 5 things to take away from today's conference. First off is our High Street Guide. We launched it today. It's our How to Unlock the High Street. You know, we don't just talk about these issues. You've heard some great examples of people bringing about the change now, and we're sharing that best practice. So you can go to party.coop/unlock the high street/how, and you can have a look at our guide and look at how you can actually take that into your high street too. We're also holding this conference during Respect for Shop Workers Week, a really important week where we raise the issue of violence against shop workers. It's a campaign as a party we've been supporting for a long time now. We've changed the law in Scotland. We still need to change the law in England as well. So please support our Not Part of the Job campaign and look at how you can take that forward locally. The third thing to take away is our food justice campaign, and in particular, the promotion of Healthy Start vouchers. We're coming up to the Christmas period. It's going to be a difficult time for lots of families, and we'll have new data available so you can see how families in your area are taking up Healthy Start vouchers. And we've got lots of ideas about how to promote that as well. And the fourth one, of course, is the 12 ideas. We've published our Welsh and our Scottish versions today because there are all-out elections in Wales and Scotland, and we want to see as many cooperative candidates and cooperative ideas going forward as possible. So go and download those ideas, party.coop/12 ideas. You've had a real good flavour of some of those manifesto ideas today, all tried and tested. So please do take those forward into your campaigns and manifestos for the local government elections next year, which brings me on to my final ask. If you haven't joined our Co-op Candidate Development Programme, then absolutely you should do it now. It's open to existing long-standing councillors, to new councillors, or people who are just thinking about maybe standing for local government. If you join the programme, it's how you get the Co-op Party nomination, but also there's lots of training and support available for you as well. We want to see as many Co-op candidates in those big elections next year standing for the Co-op Party. So without further ado, it just goes for me to say a big thank you. So thank you to our speakers throughout the morning. Too many to mention, but we've had some great contributions and we really do value those. A big thank you to all the staff that have made this happen, all the tech support behind the scenes that have made it happen today. Thank you very much. And it just goes for me to say a big thank you to you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.